If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Joseph Tallfeather, but everyone calls me Joe. I've been a park ranger at Grand Canyon National Park for 11 years now. I want to tell you about something that happened to me back in 1968, something I've never told anyone before. Even now, I'm not sure you'll believe me. It started on a beautiful morning in early summer. The sun was just coming up, painting the canyon walls with gold and deep red colors. I remember how quiet it was as I began walking down into a side canyon that not many people visit. As I hiked down the narrow trail, my boots crunched on the rocky ground. Little clouds of dust swirled around my feet, catching the early morning light like tiny dancers in the air. The canyon was so silent that the sound of my footsteps seemed too loud. I stopped for a moment to take a drink from my water canteen. Looking up at the massive rock walls around me, I couldn't help but admire their beauty. These layers of stone told the story of millions of years of Earth's history. This incredible place was my office, and even after all these years, it still took my breath away. The smell of sage plants and sun-warmed rocks filled the air as I checked my map. I was heading to investigate some strange rock carvings that a team of researchers had found in a cave that wasn't on any of our maps. As I continued walking, I noticed something odd on the dusty path. Strange tracks that didn't look right. They weren't exactly human footprints, but they weren't animal tracks either. What really gave me the creeps was how they seemed to change as they went along the path. In some places, they looked like five-toed human prints, but then they would suddenly change to hoof marks like a deer or goat. But no animal I knew could change its feet while walking. Another thing that bothered me was how quiet it was. Usually, the desert is full of life. Little lizards sunning themselves on rocks, ravens calling out as they fly overhead. But not today. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. It was as if all the animals had decided to stay away from this part of the canyon. Then the wind started to act strange. Instead of blowing in one direction like normal wind, it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Small dust devils, those little spinning columns of dust, formed around me, spinning upward in ways I'd never seen before, then suddenly collapsing. Tried to radio back to Ranger headquarters to check in, but all I got was static. The deeper I went into the side canyon, the worse the signal got, until there was nothing but crackling noise. When I got near the entrance to the cave where the researchers had found the rock carvings, something even stranger happened. The air suddenly got cold, really cold. Cold enough that I could see my breath fog in front of my face. This made no sense. It was early summer in the Arizona desert. There shouldn't be any cold spots like this. I stood there for a moment, looking at the dark opening of the cave. Everything was telling me to turn around, to head back to safety. But I had a job to do. And anyway, I'd never been one to run from strange things. So I switched on my flashlight and stepped into the darkness, not knowing that my life was about to change forever. I should probably tell you a bit more about myself. I'm 43 years old now. My father was Navajo and my mother was Hopi. Growing up with feet in two different tribes wasn't always easy. I learned a lot from both sides of my family, but I never felt like I fully belonged to either one. My face is brown and weathered from all my years working outdoors. People tell me I have eagle eyes. I don't miss much when I'm out in the canyon. That's a skill that has saved my life more than once. Before I became a park ranger, I was in the Army Rangers. I served 2 tours in Vietnam. When I came back home, I wasn't in a good place. The war left scars that weren't just on my body. Coming back to these ancient canyons helped me heal. There's something about being surrounded by rocks that have stood for millions of years that makes human problems seem smaller. Around my neck, I wear a special necklace. It has bear claws and blue-green turquoise stones. My grandfather, who was a medicine man in our tribe, gave it to me before I left. For the war, he told me it would protect me from harm. I haven't taken it off in 20 years. I walk with a bit of a limp. During my second tour in Vietnam, I caught some shrapnel in my leg. That's what sent me home for good. At first, I hated my injury, but over time, I've made peace with it. In a strange way, it forced me to learn the canyon in a different way. Finding paths that worked for me when the regular trails were too difficult. The other rangers respect me, but I know some of them think I'm a bit strange. A few years back, I started to get feelings about when flash floods were coming, even when the sky was clear. I've found lost hikers in places no one else thought to look. Some call it a sixth sense. My grandfather would have called it something else. For the past week before heading into that cave, I'd been having terrible dreams. In them I saw something ancient waking up deep in the canyon, something that should have stayed asleep. The dreams started right after that research team went down to study the cave paintings. My grandfather taught me all the old stories, legends, about places where the wall between our world and other worlds gets thin, places where things can cross over. As a modern man with scientific training, I tried not to think about those stories too much, but as a Navajo and Hopi, I couldn't ignore them either. I'm the last one in my family line now. While I was fighting overseas, there was a house fire. My parents and my little sister Sarah died in it. The police said it was an accident, but there were things that never made sense to me. That loss follows me everywhere, like a shadow that never leaves, no matter where the sun is in the sky. Over my years in the canyon, I've kept a small notebook of strange things I've seen. Lights where no lights should be. Rock formations that change overnight. Sounds that have no source. The Park Service scientists laugh these things off. They say it's just tricks of light or wind or an active imagination. Maybe they're right. But maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be explained. Maybe some deserve to be respected from a distance. As I stood at the entrance to that dark cave, all those old stories and warnings from my grandfather came flooding back. I remembered how he would say, "Not all empty places are truly empty. Joseph, some are not empty enough." With my flashlight in hand, I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the cold air wrapping around me like an unwelcome hand on my shoulder. As soon as I entered the cave, I knew something was wrong. The research team had left all their equipment behind, expensive cameras, measuring tools, notebooks. Everything was just sitting there like they'd dropped it all and ran. Nobody leaves thousands of dollars of equipment behind unless they're really scared. I shined my flashlight on the cave walls to look at the rock drawings they'd been studying. They were unlike any petroglyphs I'd seen before. They showed people with animal heads, standing in a circle. In the middle was a strange figure that seemed to change. I don't mean it moved exactly, but when I shifted my position or moved, my light, the figure looked different, like it was never meant to be seen the same way twice. The air in the cave felt heavy, like it was pushing against me. Sounds echoed in weird ways. Sometimes I'd hear the echo before I made the sound, which isn't possible, but that's what it felt like. My flashlight beam caught something moving at the edge of the light. When I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there. But it was like seeing something pour itself from one shadow to another, not quite solid, not quite liquid. I told myself it was just my imagination. On the ground near one of the backpacks, I found a small voice recorder. It belonged to Dr. Westlake, the leader of the research team. I pressed play and listened. "Day 1 in the cavern system," his voice said, sounding calm and professional. As I kept listening, his voice changed. By the last recording, he sounded frightened. "Day 4. Something is following us. I've seen it 3 times now. The others have seen it too. It looks like people we know, but wrong somehow. It wears their faces, but not correctly. God help us." That was the last entry. I clicked the recorder off, my hands shaking a little. I turned around to look back the way I'd come, and froze. There was a small pile of stones, stacked one on top of another. A cairn like hikers sometimes build. But I was certain it hadn't been there when I walked in, and it was balanced in a way that seemed impossible, the stones barely touching each other. As I watched, I noticed more cairns around the cave, all in places I would have seen someone walking to. Something even stranger happened with my shadow. The beam from my flashlight made it stretch across the cave floor, but sometimes it moved when I didn't. Just small movements at first. A twitch of an arm that wasn't mine, a turn of the head when I was looking straight ahead. When I stared directly at it, it snapped back to matching me exactly. I looked back at the rock drawings and felt my blood run cold. They had changed. I was sure of it. The circle of figures was in a slightly different position. The animal heads were facing a new direction. It was subtle, but I'd been staring at them just minutes before. They had definitely changed. From deeper in the cave came a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A clicking noise, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone tapping bones together. It wasn't random. It had a pattern that almost sounded like talking, if talking could be done without a voice. My flashlight beam landed on a yellowed piece of paper tucked into a crack in the wall. I carefully pulled it out. It was a journal page, the paper brittle with age. The handwriting was faded but still readable. Spanish, dated 1541. I could read enough Spanish to understand the warning it contained. It waits in the darkness. It learns from what it consumes, gaining knowledge through flesh. May God have mercy on anyone who awakens it. I should have left right then. Every instinct told me to get out, to run back to the sunlight and safety. But I couldn't leave without finding out what happened to the research team. They might still be alive, lost deeper in the cave system. I had to at least try to find them. So I followed the clicking sound, moving deeper into the darkness, each step taking me farther from the world I knew. The beam of my flashlight seemed to grow weaker, the darkness thicker, almost like it was alive and fighting against the light. Didn't know it then, but I was walking straight towards something that had been waiting for centuries, something hungry, something patient, something that was already learning about me with every breath I took in that cold, dead air. As I moved deeper into the cave, the passages got narrower and the ceiling lower. I had to duck my head in some spots. The clicking sound grew louder, then suddenly stopped. The silence felt even worse somehow. That's when I saw him, Dr. Westlake. He was standing about 30 feet ahead of me with his back turned. Relief washed over me. "Dr. Westlake," I called out. "I'm Ranger Tallfeather. I'm here to help you and your team." He didn't answer. He just stood there, perfectly still. "Dr. Westlake," I tried again, walking closer. When he finally turned around, I nearly dropped my flashlight. It looked like Dr. Westlake, but something was terribly wrong. He moved like his joints were in the wrong places. And his face seemed to slide and shift. His eyes, nose, and mouth moved around like they were floating in water, never quite staying where they should be. And that's when I saw what I was really dealing with. The old stories were true. The thing in front of me was what my people call a skinwalker, a being that can take the shape of people or animals. But this one couldn't quite get it right. It was like it was still learning how to be human. "Hello, Joe." "Tallfeather," it said, using my voice perfectly. Not Westlake's voice, mine. The sound bounced off the cave walls, coming back to me from every direction. "Hello, Joe. Tallfeather," the echoes repeated, each time with a small change, like it was practicing. I stood frozen as it took a step toward me. It didn't leave footprints in the dusty cave floor, but the air around it moved in strange currents. A smell hit me, like rotten meat mixed with sage burning at a funeral. I'd never smelled anything like it, but somehow I knew it was the smell of death and mockery together. "Where is the real Dr. Westlake?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The thing smiled with too many teeth. "He taught me so much," it said, still using my voice. Then it switched to a voice I hadn't heard in 20 years. My sister, Sarah's voice. Just like your sister taught me. She cried for you at the end, Joey. She called your name when the smoke got too thick. Ice filled my veins. There was no way it could know that. No way it could know what her voice sounded like or what she called me. No one knew she had died calling my name except me. And I only knew because I'd heard it in my nightmares for years. After, I pulled out my service revolver and fired a warning shot past its head. The bullet went straight through the thing like it was made of smoke. For a moment its shape scattered like fog, then pulled back together. When it reformed, its movements were smoother, more human-like. That's when I realized my mistake. Every time I interacted with it, it learned. It was studying me, copying me, getting better at pretending to be human. It was like watching a predator improve its hunting technique right in front of my eyes. The creature moved with impossible speed. 1 second it was in front of me, the next it was clinging to the cave wall like a spider, then squeezing through, a crack that was barely an inch wide. It moved so fast that all I could see was a blur, like a photograph taken while someone was moving. I backed away, keeping my gun pointed at it, even though I knew bullets wouldn't help. As I retreated, I stumbled over something. Looking down, I saw a small pile of personal items, watches, wallets, glasses, and other things that must have belonged to the research team. But there was something else mixed in with them that made my stomach turn. Human remains, small parts, a lock of hair carefully tied with string, fingernail clippings arranged in a neat row, and worst of all, a single human eye, somehow still moist and preserved, staring up at nothing. The skinwalker was collecting pieces of its victims, not just taking their shapes, but keeping souvenirs, learning from them, becoming them in some twisted way. You taste of fear, Joseph Tallfeather, the thing said, now using Dr. Westlake's voice. Your fear is different, deeper, older. It paused, head tilting at an impossible angle. I want to know why. It flowed down from the ceiling, reforming into a shape that was almost human, but not quite. Parts of it seemed to be made of different animals, deer legs, human arms, what looked like wolf fur on its shoulders. Its face was the worst part, features from different people blended together like it couldn't decide which face to wear. Stay back, I warned, though I knew threats were useless. I have been here since before your kind had names, it said. I will be here when your cities are dust. It reached for me with 2 long fingers that ended in claws. I backed away, feeling the wall of the cave behind me. I was trapped with nowhere to run, facing something that couldn't be shot, couldn't be fought, maybe couldn't be stopped, and all I could think was, I need to make sure this thing never gets out of this cave, never reaches the world above. Whatever happens to me, I can't let it escape. My radio suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. A voice came through the static. Tallfeather, you there? Report your status. For a second, hope flared in my chest. Then it died as I realized the voice was wrong. It sounded like Mike from headquarters, but the words were slightly off, the rhythm not quite right. I looked at the creature, which was grinning with that terrible, not quite human face. Your friends are worried about you, it said in Mike's voice. Then I understood. The thing had already reached the ranger station. It had already taken someone else's shape. My blood ran cold at the thought of what that meant for Mike and the others. I remembered something my grandfather taught me long ago. Frantically, I dug in my pocket for the small pouch I always carried. Inside was crushed turquoise and dried sage. Things he said would protect against evil spirits. I quickly made a circle around myself on the cave floor. The skinwalker hissed when it saw what I was doing. It paced around the circle, but didn't cross the line of blue powder. Old magic, it said, sounding almost impressed. But how long can you stay in there? Joseph Tallfeather. Around me, the air began to shimmer. Ghostly shapes appeared. Members of the research team. Dr. Westlake, a young woman who must have been their photographer. an older man with glasses. They looked almost transparent, like fog shaped into human form. Their mouths moved, asking for help, begging me to save them. But as I watched, their voices changed, becoming less human, turning into horrible screeching sounds. "They are part of me now," the skinwalker said, "just as you will be. I needed to think. The protective circle wouldn't last forever." I remembered from the old stories that these creatures had weaknesses. What were they? My mind raced. Then I remembered. My grandfather once said evil spirits can't stand to see their own reflection. They can't face what they truly are. I had a small pocket mirror in my pack, something I used for signaling in emergencies. I slowly reached for it, trying not to let the creature see what I was doing. When I pulled out the mirror and pointed it at the skinwalker, it shrieked and backed away. Its form wavered and broke apart briefly before pulling itself together again. That gave me an idea. I knew these caves. I'd explored most of them over the years, and I remembered that deeper in this system there was an underground lake. Still, and clear as glass. If a small mirror could hurt it, what would a lake-sized one do? I broke through the circle and ran deeper into the cave. The skinwalker howled behind me, recovering quickly and giving chase. I sprinted through narrow passages, ducking low-hanging rocks, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. The thing followed, sometimes running like a human, sometimes flowing along the walls and ceiling like a liquid shadow. I burst into a large chamber, and there it was, the underground lake, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the stalactites above like a perfect mirror. The skinwalker entered the chamber, behind me, and stopped. It seemed wary of the water. Then it tried a new tactic. Its form shifted and flowed until it looked exactly like my sister Sarah, as she had been the last time I saw her alive, 20 years younger than me now. "Joey," it said in her voice, "why did you leave me? You could have saved me from the fire if you'd been there." The words cut deep. It was my deepest regret, my greatest pain, that I hadn't been there when my family needed me. "Remember when we used to catch frogs at the creek behind Grandpa's house?" the thing said, smiling Sarah's smile perfectly. "Remember how we'd count the stars from the roof? I miss you, Joey. I can bring them all back to you. Mom, Dad, me. We can be together again. Just give me your hand." It was so tempting. It looked so much like her, sounded so much like her. It knew things only Sarah would know. For a moment I almost believed it. But then I noticed something. As it stood there looking like my sister, its shadow on the cave wall didn't match. The shadow had too many limbs, a head that wasn't human. "You're not my sister," I said. "My sister is gone, and you're not taking anyone else." I lunged forward suddenly, catching it by surprise, and pushed it toward the lake. It howled and fought, its form changing rapidly between human and animal, shapes trying to break free. We struggled at the edge of the water, and then we both fell in. The moment it touched the water, the skinwalker screamed. Not a human scream, a sound like metal tearing and animals dying all at once. In the water it couldn't hold its shape. It thrashed and broke apart, revealing what it truly was. A swirling mass of darkness studded with too many eyes, too many teeth. I fought to keep it underwater, to hold it against its own reflection. As we struggled, I noticed something about the petroglyphs on the wall near the lake. They weren't just drawings, they were a pattern, a kind of lock or prison. And the researchers had broken it when they removed some of the rocks for study. The skinwalker had been trapped here long ago, by people who knew what it was. And now it was loose again. I knew what I had to do. The necklace my grandfather had given me, the bear claws and turquoise, it wasn't just jewelry. It was made to fight things like this. My grandfather must have known someday I would need it. Ripped the necklace from my neck and used the sharp bear claws to carve the missing symbols back into the stone wall, completing the ancient pattern. I pressed pieces of turquoise into the fresh marks, my hands shaking with effort. As I put the last piece in place, the whole cave began to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling, splashing into the lake. The skinwalker howled in rage as the water began to glow with an eerie blue light. I felt power building, pressing against my ears like before a thunderstorm. "No!" it screamed, finally using its own voice, a terrible sound like many voices speaking together. "I will not be imprisoned again." I scrambled away from the collapsing chamber, rocks falling all around me. Something sharp slashed across my back, the skinwalker making one last attempt to stop me. Pain exploded across my shoulders, but I kept moving, crawling and stumbling through the tunnel as the cave collapsed behind me. I don't remember much of how I got out. I was half conscious, bleeding, when I finally crawled into the sunlight. Another ranger found me 2 days later, delirious with fever from infected wounds that wouldn't heal properly. I told them there had been a cave-in, that the research team had been lost. I never told anyone what I really saw. Who would believe me? The wounds on my back left strange scars, not like normal cuts. Sometimes they burn and itch, especially at night. Sometimes I dream of darkness and hunger and patient waiting. 3 months after it happened, visitors to the canyon started reporting a helpful older Navajo ranger who would appear out of nowhere to guide lost hikers to safety. They said he knew the canyon impossibly well, but something about him seemed off. His movements weren't quite right. His smile never reached his eyes. When they checked back at headquarters, they found no record of such a ranger on staff. I hear these stories and I wonder, did I really trap the skinwalker that day in the cave? Or did it learn enough from me, from my blood, from my fear, to finally perfect its disguise? Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch my reflection moving a half-second too late. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see something else looking back at me from behind my own eyes, and I wonder, who really came out of that cave that day? Who am I now? My name is Malcolm Reed. I've been a park ranger in the boundary waters of Minnesota for 15 years now. It's a peaceful life, most days. Just me, the lakes, and the ancient pines that whisper secrets when the wind blows through them. This story I'm about to tell you, I wish it wasn't true. Sometimes I wake up hoping it was just a nightmare, but the scars I carry tell me otherwise. It began on a perfect July morning, the kind that makes you grateful to be alive. The sun was just peeking over the eastern shore, turning the mist on the lake into a golden cloud. I pushed my canoe out from the main ranger station just after 5, like I did every Thursday when I'd head out to check on my remote outpost cabin. The water was flat as glass that morning. My paddle barely made a sound as it dipped in and out. That's what I love most about these early patrols, the stillness. After 2 tours in Vietnam, stillness became something sacred to me. "Another beautiful day, eh, Scout?" I said to my German shepherd sitting patiently at the front of the canoe. His ears perked up at his name, but he kept his eyes fixed ahead. Scout had been with me for 7 years, the most loyal partner a lonely old ranger could ask for. A loon called somewhere to my right, its haunting cry echoing across the water. Another answered from farther away. The ancient pines surrounding the lake creaked softly in the light breeze, like they were talking among themselves. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and cool morning air. This place had become my sanctuary, my saving grace after what I'd seen in the war. About an hour into my journey, I spotted a bull moose wading at the edge of the lake, a magnificent creature, velvet still covering his growing antlers. He looked up as I passed, regarding me with calm curiosity before lowering his head back to drink. This was nature in perfect harmony. This was why I chose this life. By 8 o'clock, I could see my outpost cabin through the trees. It sat on a small rise, about 50 yards from the shore, a simple wooden structure that had weathered countless Minnesota winters. As I beached the canoe and secured it, something felt different. "Come on, Scout, let's get unpacked," I said, gathering my rucksack. But Scout didn't move. He remained in the canoe, his body suddenly rigid, hackles raised along his back. I'd never seen him act this way before. "What's wrong, boy?" His eyes were fixed on the tree line beyond the cabin, a low growl rumbling in his chest. That's when I noticed the scratches, deep gouges in the bark of the pines surrounding my cabin. They were far too high for a bear, at least 8 feet up the trunks. Whatever made them would have to be standing on its hind legs and be taller than any creature I knew lived in these woods. I felt a sudden chill, making me zip up my jacket despite it being mid-July. The temperature seemed to have dropped 10 degrees in the span of minutes. Strange. The weather report had promised clear skies and warm temperatures all week. As I coaxed Scout out of the canoe, I became aware of something else. The silence. Complete, absolute silence. No birds chattering in the trees, no squirrels scrambling through the underbrush, no insects buzzing, nothing. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I reached for my radio, thinking I should check in with headquarters. Nothing but static came through, which made no sense with the clear sky above. I was 30 miles from the nearest road, with no backup readily available if something was wrong. I'd been in enough tight spots in my life to know when to be cautious. "Stay close," I told Scout as we made our way up the path to the cabin. That's when I smelled it, a strange, sweet odor, like decaying meat mixed with burned sugar. It was faint but unmistakable, and completely out of place in the clean wilderness air. The hair on the back of my neck stood up when I saw the cabin door was already open, just a few inches, but I knew I'd locked it tight during my last visit. Scout growled again, louder this time. Drawing my service revolver, something I rarely did in the park, I approached slowly. "Hello? Anyone there?" I called out, knowing that sometimes hikers broke into ranger cabins if they got lost or caught in bad weather. No answer. With my back against the wall, I pushed the door open with the barrel of my gun. The cabin was empty, but not undisturbed. Someone, or something, had been inside. The temperature inside was even colder than outside, so cold I could see my breath puffing out in little white clouds. My hand trembled slightly as I holstered my gun, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself. Everything in the cabin had been moved. Not tossed around like a bear or vandals would do, but carefully rearranged. My canned goods were stacked in perfect pyramids. My clothes had been laid out on the bed in the shape of a human figure. My maps had been pinned to the wall in a strange pattern that made no sense to me. Scout refused to enter. He stood at the threshold, whining anxiously, his tail tucked between his legs. I walked to my desk, where I kept the logbook. Flipping it open, my blood ran cold. There were new entries written in what looked exactly like my handwriting. But I hadn't been here in 2 weeks, and I certainly hadn't written, "It watches from the trees, tall, patient, hungry." Or, "The cold follows it, ancient cold, death cold." Or worst of all, "It knows my name. It whispers my name when the wind blows." I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding. I'd seen a lot of strange things in my years in the wilderness, but nothing like this. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe another ranger was playing a prank. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. But deep down, in that primal part of the brain that senses danger before we consciously understand it, I knew something was very wrong in my forest. Something ancient, something deadly. And I was alone with it, 30 miles from help. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Normally it was my favorite time of day, but as darkness crept between the ancient pines, I couldn't shake the feeling that night was bringing something terrible with it, something that had been waiting a very long time to meet me. I didn't sleep much that first night. How could I? Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind through the pines made me sit up straight. my hand reaching for the gun I'd placed on the nightstand. Scout was no better. He paced the small cabin, stopping sometimes to stare at the windows, his ears pricked forward, listening to something I couldn't hear. When he finally settled on the rug beside my bed, his body remained tense, ready to spring up at a moment's notice. As I lay there in the dark, my mind wandered back to how I ended up here, alone in the wilderness. Most people thought I was crazy, a man in his 50s living in the middle of nowhere with only a dog for company. But they didn't understand what the forest had given me. Peace. After Vietnam, peace was hard to come by. I was 22 when I was drafted, just a kid from a small town in Minnesota who'd never been farther than Minneapolis. 2 tours later, I came back a different man. The things I saw there, the things I did, they followed me home like shadows. The nightmares were the worst. I'd wake up screaming, my body soaked in sweat, believing I was back in the jungle with bullets flying overhead and men dying around me. My wife, Sarah, she tried her best to help me. She'd hold me when the shaking got bad, tell me I was safe, that I was home. But the war never really lets you go. I ran my fingers over the deep scars on my left hand, not from Vietnam, but from my early days as a ranger. A mother bear had surprised me while I was checking trail markers. She was protecting her cubs, just doing what came natural, nearly tore my hand clean off. But somehow, that bear attack helped me. The physical pain somehow made the pain in my head less important. My hand drifted to my breast pocket, where I kept my silver flask. I hadn't had a drink in nearly 5 years, not since Sarah died from cancer. I quit the day after her funeral, but I kept the flask as a reminder of my promise to her, that I'd get better, that I'd be there for our daughter, Elizabeth. I failed at that last part. Elizabeth and we haven't spoken since the funeral. She couldn't understand why I chose to live out here instead of moving closer to her in Chicago. She thought I was running away. Maybe she was right. I reached under my pillow and pulled out the worn photo I kept of her. It was taken on her college graduation day, her smile bright and full of promise. I missed that smile. I missed a lot of things. My life as a ranger had been good to me, though. 17 rescues under my belt, lost hikers, stranded canoeists, kids who wandered too far from their campsites. The other rangers called me the Ghost because I could track just about anything through these woods. After 20 years out here, I knew every island, every hidden lake, every patch of quicksand, which is why the strange things happening around my cabin bothered me so much. This was my place. I knew it, like I knew my own heartbeat. And something was very wrong. Around 3 in the morning, I must have drifted off despite my worries. My dreams were dark and confused. Trees with eyes watching me, a tall shadow moving just out of sight, the sound of teeth grinding together. I woke with a start, just as dawn was breaking. Something felt off. The air in the cabin was freezing, cold. The glass of water I'd placed beside my bed had a thin layer of ice on top. In July, in Minnesota, I sat up, reaching for my gun, when I noticed Scout. He was standing at the window, his entire body trembling, but not making a sound. I'd never seen him so afraid. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, moving to his side. Outside, the fog was thick, wrapping around the trees like ghostly fingers. As it shifted and swirled, I could just make out a set of tracks in the soft earth leading to my cabin. Deer tracks. From the look of them, but as they got closer to my door, they changed. The neat hoofprints stretched and elongated, becoming something else, something with toes, something that walked on 2 legs. They led right up to my door. And then I glanced down, my heart hammering in my chest. The door hadn't been forced. I'd locked it last night, checking the bolt 3 times before going to bed. Yet there, on the wooden floorboards, was a trail of damp footprints. They led from the door to my bedside, where they stopped. Right where? I had been sleeping. Something had been in here while I slept, standing over me, watching me. I heard a strange chittering sound from outside, like teeth chattering in the cold. Scout growled, low and dangerous. I grabbed my rifle from the rack, checking that it was loaded. My hands were steady, years of training kicking in despite my fear. Whatever was out there, I wasn't going down without a fight. That's when the radio on my desk crackled to life, making me jump. Static hissed from the speaker, then cleared momentarily. What I heard next will haunt me until the day I die. Breathing, slow, labored breathing, rattling like something was caught in a throat. And underneath it, a wet, crunching sound, like teeth grinding on bone, then a voice, distorted and barely. "Am human," whispered my name. "Malcolm." Scout began to bark furiously at the radio. I lunged forward and switched it off, my finger shaking on the power button. "Easy, boy," I said, though my own voice sounded foreign to my ears. Easy. I needed to get outside, to see if I could find tracks, evidence, anything that would make sense of what was happening. I pulled on my boots and jacket, grabbed my rifle and whistled for Scout to follow. He didn't want to go. For the first time since I'd trained him, Scout refused a command. He backed away from the door, his tail tucked tight against his body. "Fine," I said. "Stay here, guard the cabin." The relief in his eyes was almost human. The morning was unnaturally cold as I stepped outside, my breath fogging in front of me. The fog still hung between the trees, but I could see well enough to follow the tracks. They led me about 100 yards into the forest, to a clearing I knew well. What I found there stopped me in my tracks. A deer, a young doe, hung from a branch about 7 feet off the ground. But it hadn't been strung up by a hunter. No, something had impaled it on a broken branch, lifting it high into the air. The deer's body was completely drained of blood, not a drop staining the ground below. Its flesh was cut with precise, almost surgical lines. No animal could make cuts like that. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I became aware of a sound, a faint, rhythmic clicking that seemed to come from all directions. At once, like dozens of tongues clicking against the roof of a mouth, I pulled out my compass, needing to get my bearings in the fog. The needle spun wildly when I pointed it toward the densest part of the forest, where the trees seemed to have grown closer together overnight. That's when I saw them, markings carved into the bark of the trees surrounding the clearing. Fresh carvings, the sap still oozing from the wounds in the wood. I recognized the style immediately. They looked like the ancient pictographs made by the Ojibwe people who had lived in these lands for centuries before Europeans arrived. But these were new, and they depicted something that made my blood run cold. A skeletal figure, impossibly tall and thin, with the head of a deer or elk. In each carving it was shown consuming human prey, the Wendigo, an ancient evil from Algonquin legends, a spirit of hunger, winter, and death. I'd heard the stories, of course. Every ranger in these parts had. Tales told around campfires about a creature that was once human, but had been transformed by committing the ultimate taboo, consuming human flesh. The stories said it was cursed to wander the forests forever, growing ever more hungry but never satisfied, no matter how much it ate. I'd always thought they were just stories, meant to warn against the dangers of greed and cannibalism. Just legends. But as I stood there in that cold clearing, with the mutilated deer hanging above me and those fresh carvings surrounding me, I wasn't so sure anymore. Something ancient and evil had entered my forest, and somehow it knew my name. Hurried back to the cabin, feeling eyes on me the whole way. Every shadow between the trees seemed to move. Every rustle in the underbrush made me whip around, rifle ready. But I saw nothing. Whatever was watching me didn't want to be seen. Not yet. Scout barked frantically as I approached the cabin, his face appearing in the window. He was glad to see me alive. That made one of us. Inside, I locked the door and pushed a heavy chair against it. Then I pulled out my map of the area and spread it on the table. If I left now, I could make it back to the main ranger station by nightfall, even paddling hard against the wind. I could bring back help, maybe. But what would I tell them? That I'd found weird carvings and a dead deer. That my radio was picking up strange noises. That I thought a monster from Native American legends was stalking me. They'd think I was having flashbacks again. They'd been worried about me ever since Sarah died. Said I was spending too much time alone in the woods. They'd take my badge, make me see the VA psychiatrist again. No, I needed more. Real proof. Something they couldn't dismiss. I spent the day securing the cabin as best I could. I boarded up the smaller window in the back. I stacked firewood by the stove, made sure I had fresh water, and checked my ammunition. Scout stayed by my side the whole time, still on edge, but calmer now that we were inside. By evening, the fog had grown thicker. It pressed against the windows like a living thing, curling and uncurling ghostly fingers. The temperature kept dropping. I had to start a fire in the wood stove, something I'd never done in July in all my years as a ranger. Night fell, and with it came the silence again. No crickets, no frogs calling from the lakeshore, no owls hooting in the trees. Just the occasional creak of the cabin settling and the soft pop of burning wood in the stove. I made a simple dinner of beans and canned ham, though I had little appetite. I gave Scout an extra portion. If things got bad, he'd need his strength. As I cleaned my rifle by the light of an oil lamp, I tried to make sense of what was happening. The stories about the Wendigo said it was most active in winter during times of famine when people were most tempted to do terrible things to survive. But this was summer, a time of plenty. Why would it be here now unless it wasn't following the normal rules? Unless it was hunting specifically, hunting me. But why me? What had I done to draw its attention? I thought back to the entries in my logbook written in my handwriting but not by me. It knows my name. Was the creature trying to communicate? Was it trying to drive me mad? I must have dozed off in my chair because the next thing I knew, Scout was growling again. The fire had died down to embers and the cabin was freezing cold. My watch said it was 3:17 a.m., the dead of night. A sound came from outside. A voice calling my name. Malcolm, help me. Please. It was Elizabeth's voice, my daughter's voice. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. It couldn't be her. Elizabeth was in Chicago, hundreds of miles away, and she hadn't spoken to me in 5 years. This was a trick. Malcolm, Daddy, I'm hurt. Help me. The voice was coming from just beyond the tree line. It sounded exactly like my daughter, the same slight quiver when she was scared, the same soft way she used to say Daddy when she was little. Scout growled louder. Backing away from the door, I grabbed my rifle and went to the window, peering into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but fog and the dark shapes of trees. Then, movement. A figure at the edge of the clearing. Slender, like Elizabeth. The right height, too. Malcolm, I'm bleeding. I need you. Every instinct in me screamed to run outside, to help her. It was my little girl. But a small, rational part of my brain held me back. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. I remembered something I'd read about the Wendigo. It could mimic the voices of loved ones to lure its prey into the forest, where it could hunt them, eat them. You're not my daughter, I said, my voice shaking. Whatever. You are. Leave me alone. The figure stepped forward, and in the faint moonlight that broke through the clouds, I could see it wasn't Elizabeth at all. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, maybe more. Thin as a skeleton, with skin, pulled tight over elongated limbs, and on its head, I stumbled back from the window, nearly dropping my rifle. The creature had antlers, huge branching antlers that stretched toward the sky like gnarled hands. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could see its eyes, yellow and glowing like twin lanterns in the dark. The thing cocked its head, studying me through the window. Then it smiled, a wide, stretched grin that split its face almost in half, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Malcolm, it said, still in Elizabeth's voice. "Don't you love me anymore?" I raised my rifle and fired through the glass. The window shattered, and Scout began barking frantically. But when I looked back outside, the creature was gone. All that remained was swirling mist where it had stood. I reloaded quickly, moving away from the window in case it decided to reach in and grab me. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. I'd seen it now, actually seen it. The Wendigo. It was real, and it was toying with me. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat with my back to the wall, rifle across my knees, Scout pressed against my side. We watched the windows and door until dawn finally broke, pale and hazy through the fog. With daylight came a small measure of courage. I needed to check the area around the cabin to see if the creature had left any trace, any proof that I wasn't losing my mind. "Stay close," I told Scout as we ventured outside. The morning was eerily still. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our footsteps in the damp earth. I approached the spot where I'd seen the creature standing. The ground was disturbed, with strange impressions that didn't look quite like footprints, too long, too narrow, with odd sharp points at the ends, like hooves and claws combined. But what really caught my attention were the trees, all around. The clearing, new markings had been carved into the bark, deep grooves cut by something sharp. I walked from tree to tree, studying them. They formed a pattern, a circle around my cabin, some kind of boundary or a trap. I recognized some of the symbols from books I'd read about Algonquin folklore. Warnings about wendigos, about hunger, about transformation. But there were other markings too, fresh ones, still seeping sap. And these were in English, "Malcolm hungry soon," carved 6 feet up a pine trunk with letters 3 inches high. My legs nearly gave out. This wasn't a random monster from the woods. This thing was intelligent. It was communicating. It had a plan, and I was at the center of it. I heard a snap behind me and whirled around, raising my rifle. But it was just Scout, pawing anxiously at the ground. He wanted to go back to the cabin. Smart dog. As we hurried back, I noticed something glinting in the grass near my front step. I bent down to look. It was a small pile of objects arranged in a neat circle. Bones. Human finger bones, yellowed with age but recently cleaned. And in the center, a tarnished metal button. A button from a backpack that looked exactly like the one worn by a hiker who'd gone missing last autumn. Jason Thompson, his name was. 23 years old. We'd searched for weeks, but never found him. Now I knew why. I kicked the bones apart with my boot, trying not to think about the person they'd once belonged to, about how they'd died, about what had eaten them. Back inside, I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static and that awful breathing sound. I was well and truly on my own. I checked my watch. Almost noon. If I left now, I could still make it back to the station before dark. But something told me the Wendigo wouldn't let me leave. It had chosen this place for our confrontation. It had prepared. As if reading my thoughts, the temperature in the cabin plummeted suddenly. Frost formed on the insides of the windows, spreading in delicate patterns. The water in my canteen froze solid in seconds. Outside, snow began to fall, thick, heavy flakes swirling down from a clear blue sky. Impossible snow, forming drifts against the cabin in minutes. The Wendigo was changing the weather. It was making sure I couldn't escape. I was trapped, and night was coming. That afternoon, I tried to think like a ranger, not like a frightened man. I'd survived 2 tours in Vietnam. I'd faced down wounded bears and armed poachers. I wouldn't let this thing, whatever. It really was, see my fear. I made a plan. If I couldn't leave, I'd defend what I had. I gathered everything useful. Matches, first aid kit, knife, axe, all my ammunition. I filled every container with water before the pipes froze. I piled more wood by the stove. Then I waited. The impossible snow kept falling until drifts reached the windowsills, The sun, barely visible through the strange weather, began its descent toward the horizon. Hours of daylight left, but it felt like minutes. I tried to distract myself by writing in the logbook, recording everything I'd seen and experienced. If I didn't make it out, at least someone would know what happened to me. As I wrote, I felt a strange prickling at the back of my neck. I looked up at the small mirror hanging on the wall opposite me. I wasn't alone in the reflection. Standing behind me, tall enough that it had to stoop under the ceiling, was the creature. In the mirror, I could see it clearly for the first time. Its skin was grey and stretched tight over bones that seemed too long, too angular to be human. Its fingers ended in black claws that nearly touched the floor. And its face, God, its face, was a nightmare mixture of human and deer. The skull elongated, the nose and mouth pulled forward into a short muzzle, crowned with those massive antlers. But it was the eyes that froze my blood. Yellow, glowing, and eerily human. Intelligent, hungry. I spun around, gun raised, but there was nothing there. The cabin was empty except for me and Scout, who was huddled under the table, whimpering. When I looked back at the mirror, the Wendigo was gone from that too. It was playing with me, showing me glimpses of itself to wear down my nerves. And it was working. An hour before sunset, I heard voices outside again, not just Elizabeth this time, but a chorus of them, men and women, young and old, all calling my name, all begging for help. Please, we're lost. Help us, it's so cold. Malcolm, save us. I recognized some of the voices, hikers I'd rescued over the years. But others were strangers to me, probably the Wendigo's previous victims. I sat with my back against the door, hands over my ears, but the voices kept getting louder, more desperate, more convincing. Scout suddenly stopped whimpering and stood, alert, staring at the boarded-up window at the back of the cabin. Something was trying to get in. I heard scratching, then a soft tapping like fingernails on glass. "Malcolm," came a voice, soft and reasonable. "Let me in. I'm so hungry. We can share a meal." It was my own voice. My hands shook as I aimed my rifle at the window. The boards I'd nailed up were vibrating slightly, as if something was pressing against them, testing their strength. "Go away!" I shouted. "Leave me alone!" A low chuckle answered me, followed by the sound of something heavy moving around the cabin, circling it, hunting for a way in. The daylight was fading fast now. I lit the oil lamps, keeping the cabin as bright as I could. From what I knew of Wendigos, they preferred to hunt in darkness. As night fell completely, the voices outside stopped. The scratching at the windows and walls ceased. Even the strange snowstorm seemed to pause, flakes hanging suspended in the air outside my window, as if time itself had frozen. The silence was worse than the noise. At least with the voices, I knew where the creature was. Now it could be anywhere. Minutes, stretched into hours. I sat in my chair, rifle ready, jumping at every creak of the old cabin. Scout had gone from frightened to eerily calm, watching the door with an intensity that unnerved me. Suddenly, he stood up and wagged his tail. Someone knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps. "Ranger Reed, you in there?" "It's Thompson from the main station. Got your distress call." My heart leapt. Thompson was real, a fellow ranger I'd worked with for years. His voice sounded completely normal. "We've got a team out here," the voice continued. "Bad storm came out of nowhere. You okay?" I wanted so badly to believe it. I wanted it to be real help, real people, not another trick. But something felt wrong. "How'd you find me in this weather?" I called through the door, not moving from my chair. "Followed your last coordinates from the distress beacon," Thompson answered smoothly. "Come on, Reed, it's freezing out here. Open up." I hadn't sent any distress beacon. I didn't even have one. "Step back from the door," I said, raising my rifle. "I'm not opening it." "Don't be ridiculous, Reed." Thompson's voice took on an edge of annoyance. We're here to help you. Open the damn door. Prove you're really Thompson, I demanded. What's your daughter's name? A pause. Too long. Mary, the voice said finally. Her name's Mary. Now open up. Thompson didn't have a daughter. He wasn't even married. You're not Thompson, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. You're not real. Leave me alone. The thing outside hissed, a sound no human throat could make. The friendly voice dropped away, replaced by a guttural growl. Open the door. Malcolm, I'm so hungry. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. The chair I'd braced under the handle creaked but held. Another slam, harder this time. Wood splintered around the hinges. I fired through the door, once, twice, 3 times. The bullets punched clean holes in the wood. A shriek came from outside, high and inhuman like metal scraping on metal. Then silence again. I reloaded with shaking hands, expecting another attack, but none came. Minutes passed. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and Scout's soft whining. Had I wounded it, driven it away? I doubted regular bullets could kill. A Wendigo, but maybe I'd hurt it enough to make it reconsider. As the night wore on, the temperature kept dropping. My breath hung in thick white clouds. The water in my glass froze solid. Ice crystals formed on my beard and eyebrows. No matter how much wood I fed the stove, I couldn't get warm. The Wendigo was draining the heat from the air itself, trying to weaken me with cold. Around midnight, I heard a new sound outside, splashing, coming from the direction of the lake. I went to the window, careful to stand to the side in case the creature tried to grab me. What I saw made no sense. The lake was freezing. In July, ice spreading from the shore in a thick sheet, crackling as it formed, and in the center of the newly frozen section stood the Wendigo, still as a statue, watching my cabin. Even from this distance, I could see its glowing eyes fixed on me. I blinked, and it was gone, just vanished, like it had never been there. But a moment later, I heard its claws on the roof, tap, 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 walking slowly, deliberately. The whole cabin groaned under its weight. Scout barked frantically, spinning in circles as he tried to track the sound above us. I kept my rifle pointed at the ceiling, following the creature's movements. It stopped directly overhead. There was a scratching sound, then a low, wet chuckle. Something dripped from the ceiling. At first I thought it was water from melting snow, but it was too thick, too dark. Blood dripping onto my floor in a steady rhythm. The scratching continued, more purposeful now. The creature was carving something into my roof. Each gouge sent more blood dripping down, forming a small puddle on my floor. The carving stopped. The blood kept dripping for a minute, then slowed to a stop. Whatever message it had left, I wouldn't see it until daylight. Part of me didn't want to know what it said. The night seemed endless. The Wendigo kept moving around the cabin, sometimes on the roof, sometimes circling outside, occasionally tapping on a window or wall, reminding me it was still there. Still. Waiting for what? Around 4 in the morning, I dozed off despite my best efforts to stay awake. My body simply couldn't fight the exhaustion anymore. I dreamed I was walking through the forest, following a trail of bones. The trees were dead, their branches reaching for me like clawed hands. Ahead, the Wendigo waited in a clearing, crouched, over something, feeding. It looked up as I approached, its muzzle dripping with fresh blood. It smiled, revealing those needle teeth. "Malcolm," it said in Elizabeth's voice, "join me." It held out a piece of raw meat, human meat. I jolted awake to the sound of Scout growling. Dawn light filtered weakly through the frosted windows. The storm had finally stopped, leaving the world outside buried in unnatural snow. And there, scratched into the small section of floor where the blood had dripped, was a message that hadn't. "Been there when I fell asleep? Hunger never dies, but you will." The Wendigo had been inside my cabin while I slept. It could have killed me then, but it hadn't. It was enjoying this, savoring my fear. I checked my watch. Just past 6 a.m. I'd survived the night, but I knew with cold certainty that I wouldn't survive another. The creature was done playing. Tonight, it would come for me. I needed a plan, a way to fight back. Regular weapons seemed useless against it, but there had to be something. I remembered the Ojibwe legends about Wendigos. There were ways to kill them, according to the stories. Fire was one method. Another was to pierce their frozen hearts. With weapons made of special materials, I had the rest of the day to prepare, to get ready for the final confrontation, because when night fell again, one of us wouldn't see the morning. As soon as there was enough light, I searched the cabin for anything I could use against the Wendigo. I remembered what my old friend Tom White Eagle, an Ojibwe elder who sometimes worked as a guide in the park, had told me years ago about the old legends. Wendigos are spirits of cold, hunger, and greed, he'd said. They were once human until they ate human flesh. Now they're cursed to always hunger, never be satisfied. I'd asked him, half joking at the time, how to kill one. Fireworks, he'd said seriously, and a stake of pine soaked in sage and blood through their frozen heart. I didn't have sage, but I had pine, plenty of it, and I had blood, my own. If necessary, I got to work, sharpening a pine branch into a long, wicked stake. My hands moved with steady purpose. Fear was still there, ice cold in my gut, but alongside it now was determination. If I was going to die, I'd go down fighting. I found some dried herbs in my cooking supplies. Not sage, but it would have to do. I mixed them with water in a small pot and let them simmer on the wood stove. Around noon, I noticed Scout staring at my food supplies. I'd been so busy preparing that I hadn't thought about eating. I opened a can of beef stew and put it on the stove to heat. But as soon as the smell filled the cabin, my stomach turned. Something was wrong. I looked closer at the stew. It wasn't beef. The meat was pale with a strange texture. And the smell underneath the familiar stew scent was something else. Something horribly familiar from my time in Vietnam. Human flesh. Gagged, dropping the pot. The contents spilled across the floor. I checked the other cans. They all looked normal from the outside, but when I opened them, I found the same tainted meat inside. The Wendigo had been busy. It had replaced all my food with parts of its victims. It was trying to trick me into eating human flesh, into starting down the path to becoming like it. I'd rather starve. I gave Scout the last of his dog food, rationing it carefully. At least that seemed untouched. Then I went back to preparing my weapons. By mid-afternoon, I had a makeshift spear, a pine stake bound to the end of my axe handle. I'd soaked it in the herb mixture and added a few drops of my own blood, cut from my palm. I didn't know if it would work, but it was better than nothing. I also prepared the cabin. I poured my lamp oil in strategic spots, places I could light. Quickly, if I needed to try fire against the creature. I set up a few simple traps, tripwires, that would bring tools crashing down on anything that came through the door. As the light began to fade, I checked my watch. Almost 6 p.m. In a few hours, it would be fully dark. I went to the window to survey the area one last time before night fell. The unnatural snow still blanketed everything, but now there was something new. Footprints, dozens of them, circling the cabin. And a new message stomped into the snow in huge letters. "Come out, Malcolm." The Wendigo was done waiting. I knelt beside Scout, running my hand through his thick fur one last time. "You're a good boy," I told him. "The best partner a ranger could ask for." He licked my face, his dark eyes somehow understanding. He knew what was coming too. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped even further. Ice formed on the inside of the windows, spreading in crackling sheets across the glass. The fire in the wood stove dimmed, as if the cold was smothering the flames themselves. Then I heard it, a soft tapping at the door. Not threatening, almost polite. "Malcolm," came a voice. A new voice this time. Sarah's voice. My dead wife's voice, perfectly recreated. Malcolm, I've missed you so much. Please, let me in. My heart twisted. Even knowing it was a trick, hearing Sarah's voice again after 5 years was like a physical blow. "You're not her," I said, my voice thick. "She's gone. I'm waiting for you," the voice continued, ignoring my words. "Elizabeth is here too. We can be a family again." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "Stop it," I whispered. The voice changed, becoming cruel, mocking. Still Sarah's voice, but with something else behind it, something ancient and evil. "You failed her, Malcolm. You failed your wife. You failed your daughter. You'll fail yourself too." I'd had enough. I raised my rifle and fired through the door. Again, a screech answered me, followed by an enraged howl that shook the cabin. The door shuddered as something massive slammed against it. The hinges groaned. The wood splintered. One more hit and it would break through. I grabbed my makeshift spear in one hand, rifle in the other. "Get ready, Scout," I said. The final blow never came. Instead, I heard movement around the side of the cabin, scratching at the boarded window. The nails I'd hammered in that morning began to pop out one by one, pulled by an unseen force. I aimed my rifle at the window, waiting. The last board fell away. The glass was already broken from when I'd fired through it the night before. A shape filled the opening, a gaunt, skeletal arm reaching in, followed by that horned head. I fired, the bullet striking the creature in the shoulder. It jerked back, black ichor spraying from the wound, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it smiled. That terrible, too-wide smile full of needle teeth. "Little man," it hissed in a voice like cracking ice, "your time is up." It lunged forward, squeezing its massive frame through the window with impossible flexibility. Scout leaped at it, teeth bared, while I frantically tried to reload. The Wendigo swatted Scout aside with one clawed hand, sending him crashing into the wall with a pained yelp. Then it turned its glowing yellow eyes on me. I'd seen a lot of terrible things in Vietnam. I'd faced death more times than I could count. But nothing had prepared me for the pure malevolence in those eyes. This was an evil older than mankind, patient and cunning and utterly ruthless. I didn't have time to reload. I dropped the rifle and grabbed my spear, thrusting it at the creature's chest. The Wendigo moved with blinding speed, grabbing the shaft. Before the point could connect, with a flick of its wrist, it snapped the handle in two, leaving me holding a useless stick. "I have waited," it growled, stepping fully into the cabin. It had to stoop to fit under the ceiling, its antlers scraping. The wooden beams watched you, learned you, hungry for you. It took a step toward me. I backed away, fumbling in my pocket for matches. "Why me?" I asked, trying to buy time. "Why here?" The Wendigo's head tilted, antlers brushing the ceiling. "You are alone. Forgotten." Perfect. Another step forward. Its claws flexed, eager to tear into me. "No one will miss you," it continued, its voice a rasping whisper. "No one will look like the others before." I realized with horror that it had been hunting in these woods for years, taking lone hikers, solitary rangers, people no one would miss right away, people whose disappearances could be explained by accidents, by the dangers of the wilderness. People like me. My back hit the wall, nowhere left to run. The Wendigo loomed over me, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from its body, cold like the grave. Its mouth opened wider than any human mouth could, ready to feed. That's when Scout attacked again. My brave, loyal dog launched himself at the creature, teeth sinking into its leg. The Wendigo shrieked in rage, trying to shake him off. It was the distraction I needed. I struck a match and tossed it onto the oil I'd poured earlier. Flames erupted, catching the creature's tattered clothing. Fire blossomed across the Wendigo's back. It howled, thrashing wildly, trying to extinguish the flames. In its frenzy, it knocked over the wood stove, sending burning logs across the floor. In seconds, the whole cabin was ablaze. I looked for Scout, but couldn't see him through the spreading fire and smoke. "Scout!" I called, coughing as the smoke filled my lungs. The Wendigo, still burning, fixed its gaze on me. Its flesh blackened and cracked, but it didn't die. Instead, it seemed to grow more enraged, more determined. I grabbed the broken half of my spear, the half with the pine stake still attached, and backed toward the door. If fire wouldn't kill it, maybe the stake still could, the creature pursued me through the flaming cabin, heedless of the fire consuming it. I tripped over something and fell hard, the stake flying from my grasp. I looked up to see the Wendigo standing over me, its body a charred, skeletal nightmare wreathed in flames. It reached for me with burning hands. Then Scout was there, my faithful partner until the end. He leaped between us, teeth bared in a final act of protection. The Wendigo's claws lashed out, catching Scout in midair. My dog's yelp of pain became a whimper, then silence. "No!" I screamed, rage overtaking fear. I scrambled for the stake, fingers closing around it just as the Wendigo reached for me again. I rolled to my feet and charged, driving the stake upward. With all my strength, aiming for the center of the creature's chest, the pine stake sank deep into the Wendigo's body. The creature froze, its yellow eyes widening in what might have been surprise or respect. A sound escaped it, not a roar or a screech, but a sigh. Almost relieved. Black ichor poured from the wound, hissing where it hit the flaming floor. The Wendigo staggered backward, clawed hands clutching at the stake protruding from its chest. For a moment, I thought I'd won. Then the creature looked at me, and in its ancient eyes I saw something I hadn't expected. Triumph. "Thank you," it whispered in a voice suddenly horribly human. Its body began to disintegrate, flaking away like ash in the wind. But as it disappeared, something else took shape in the air. A black mist, swirling and alive with malevolence. The mist surged toward me. I tried to run, but it was too fast. It engulfed me, forcing its way into my nose, my mouth, the cut on my palm. Cold filled me, from the inside out. A hunger unlike anything I'd ever known clawed at my gut, and knowledge, ancient, terrible knowledge, flooded my mind. I understood then. The legends were true, but incomplete. You could kill a Wendigo, but when you did, its spirit needed a new host, and by killing it I had volunteered. The cabin was collapsing around me, but I barely noticed. The fire couldn't touch me now. The cold inside me was stronger. I walked out into the night, leaving the burning cabin behind. Scout's body lay near the door. I felt I should mourn him, but the hunger was already washing away such human concerns. I looked down at my hands. They were longer now, the fingers stretching into claws. I could feel my teeth sharpening in my mouth, my spine elongating. The transformation had begun. In the distance, I heard voices. The main ranger station must have seen the fire. They would come looking for me. They would find a burnt cabin, a dead dog, maybe some bones. They would search, then give up eventually. Another tragedy in the wilderness. I turned away, moving deeper into the forest, my new home. The hunger pulled me forward, demanding to be fed. And I knew just where to find my first meal. Chicago was a long journey away, but I had time. All the time in the world now, and Elizabeth, my estranged daughter, would be so happy to see her father again. 2 months later, a search party found Malcolm Reed's cabin burned to the ground. All that remained was his ranger badge, his dog's charred remains, and a final entry in his logbook, salvaged from the ashes. I am so hungry. The forest calls me to hunt. Forgive me, Elizabeth. Since then, hikers in the Boundary Waters have reported seeing a tall figure with antlers watching from the tree line. They say, if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you can hear it whispering your name. My name is William Okafor, but everyone calls me Will. I've been a park ranger at Redwood National Park for almost 8 years now. This is my story. One I'm still not sure I should be telling. But people need to know what's happening in these woods. It all started on a foggy morning last spring. The kind of morning where mist hangs between the giant redwoods like ghostly curtains. I was walking one of the remote trails, doing my regular checks. The ground was wet with dew and spider. Webs glistened between the ferns like tiny crystal nets. The sun was just breaking through the tops of the trees, hundreds of feet above my head. It made these beautiful golden spotlights on the forest floor. On mornings like this, I remember why I gave up teaching at the university to work here. Nothing beats being surrounded by these ancient giants. I stopped to take some moisture readings. We'd been having an unexpected drought, and I needed to track how it was affecting different parts of the forest. The rich smell of dirt and wet bark filled my lungs as I knelt down. This is the smell of home to me. In a small clearing nearby, a family of deer was eating quietly. They didn't run when they saw me. They know me by now. I've always moved carefully through their home, respecting that I'm just a visitor here. As I continued down the trail, something caught my eye. The ferns and mosses in this section were growing way too fast. I have 2 PhDs, one in forestry and one in mycology, that's the study of fungi, and what I was seeing didn't make scientific sense. Plants don't grow this quickly, especially not during a drought. The forest suddenly went quiet. No woodpeckers tapping on trees, no squirrels chattering. Just silence. The trail ahead looked like no one had walked it for years, even though our maintenance crew had cleared it just 3 days ago. Somehow, years of growth had happened in less than a week. That's when I found the backpack. It was sitting just off. The trail and moss was already growing over it, aggressive, thick moss that had nearly swallowed the whole bag. That's not normal. Synthetic materials like nylon take months or years to start breaking down, not days. The air felt wrong too. While the morning was cool everywhere else, this section felt warm and humid, like a tropical rainforest instead of Northern California. My skin prickled with sweat as I examined the backpack. I tried to radio back to headquarters about what I'd found, but all I got was static. My radio never fails in this part of the forest. Something was blocking the signal. I'm tall, 6'4", and pretty strong from years of fieldwork, but standing there in that unnaturally silent grove, I felt small, very small. And for the first time in my life, I felt unwelcome in my beloved forest. I reached down to touch the journal sticking out of the backpack, my fingers brushing against moss that seemed to pulse under my touch. The curved scar on my face, a reminder. From a logging protest that turned violent years ago, began to throb as if warning me. I've always been good at noticing patterns. It's why I'm good at my job. My colleagues think I'm a bit weird for it, but I can spot changes in the forest that nobody else sees. And everything around me was screaming that something was very, very wrong. I pulled out my own worn field journal, the one filled with a decade of sketches and notes about fungi and growth patterns throughout the park. I need to document this. I thought, no one will believe me otherwise. As I started to sketch what I was seeing, I found myself reaching for the wooden flute that hangs from my belt. My Nigerian father carved it for me when I was a boy. I often play it when I'm alone in the woods. The music calms me and helps me think. But today, my fingers trembled as they touched the smooth wood. Something was happening in my forest. Something that shouldn't be possible, and I was the only one who knew. I knelt down to get a closer look at the strange growths on the forest floor. What I saw made my stomach tighten. Fungi were growing in perfect circles, not random like they should be, but arranged as if someone had planted them that way on purpose. Even more disturbing were the slime molds. Normally these weird organisms just spread out in random patterns, but here they were forming shapes like arrows, all pointing deeper into the forest where no trails existed. It was as if they were trying to tell me something or lead me somewhere. My heart beat faster as I stood up. 20 years studying plants, and I'd never seen anything like this. A few yards away, I spotted one of our research cameras. We set these up to take pictures when animals walk by, but this one was completely covered in moss, thick, pulsing moss that seemed to breathe. When I pulled some of it away, I found the memory card was missing. "Hello?" I called out, wondering if another ranger or maybe a lost hiker had been here. "Anyone there?" Only silence answered me. I turned back to the backpack and carefully opened it. Inside was a journal, its pages damp but still readable. I flipped through it, and what I read sent a chill through me. Day 3. Something strange is happening in this section of forest. At night, I swear I can see movement in the trees, but when I shine my flashlight, nothing's there. Day 5. The moss around my campsite has doubled in size overnight. That's not possible, is it? I'm going to move my tent tomorrow. Day 7. I can hear it now. The moss has a heartbeat. I'm not crazy. It beats like a heart. I need to get out of here. That was the last entry. I looked at the date, just 1 week ago. I put the journal in my pocket and started searching the area for any sign of the missing hiker. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Tree roots that had pulled themselves out of the ground. They stretched across the forest floor like giant fingers or tentacles, some forming perfect squares and triangles. Nature doesn't make perfect shapes like that. Ever. Following these unnatural root patterns, I moved deeper into the untrailed section of forest. About 50 yards in, I found a scrap of fabric, a piece of what looked like a hiking jacket, somehow grown into the bark of a tree hundreds of feet from any trail. It wasn't just stuck there. It was like the tree had absorbed it. This isn't happening, I whispered to myself, but it was. Some of the trees had a red substance oozing from their trunks. It looked like sap, but was darker, thicker. I took out my field microscope kit, the small one I always carry, and took a sample. What I saw made me drop the slide. The sap contained red blood cells, human red blood cells. I backed away from the tree, my hands shaking. Looking up, I noticed that the forest canopy, the ceiling of branches and leaves above me, was slowly closing. The branches were moving, weaving together like a basket, even though there wasn't any wind. It was as if the forest was trying to trap me underneath. Forcing myself to stay calm, I took a sample from a small stream nearby. Under my microscope, the water was filled with spores I'd never seen before. As I watched, they seemed to organize themselves, forming structures that looked like tiny nerve cells, like they were building something. I needed to get out, to report what I'd found. But first, I had to see where those arrow-shaped slime molds were pointing. Following their direction led me to something impossible, a massive, perfectly circular clearing that wasn't on any park map. I've walked every inch of this forest over the past 8 years. This clearing should not exist. Inside the circle, dozens of different plant species had arranged themselves in a spiral pattern, all pointing toward the center where a patch of glowing moss pulsed with an eerie greenish light. I stood at the edge of this unnatural clearing, my scientific mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Everything I knew about botany, about forest ecosystems, about the natural world, none of it explained this. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, I felt like I was being watched by thousands of eyes. Eyes, hidden in the bark, in the leaves, in the very soil beneath my feet. And then, from the center of the spiral, I heard a voice call my name. "Hello, Ranger Okafor. I've been waiting for you." I wasn't alone in the clearing anymore. I froze, staring at the man standing in the center of the clearing. He looked like an ordinary hiker, jeans, flannel shirt, hiking boots, and a friendly smile. But something about him felt wrong. "I'm Lawrence," he said, stepping toward me with his hand outstretched. "Are you lost too?" I shook his hand carefully. It felt cold and slightly damp, like moss after rain. "I'm Will Okafor, Park Ranger," I said. "What are you doing out here? This area's off trail." Lawrence smiled. Oh, I know all the secret paths in this forest. Been hiking here for years. As we talked, I noticed strange things about him. His skin had a greenish tint, like he was slightly sick. He never blinked, not once. And when the breeze blew, tiny hair-like things on his neck moved in the wrong direction, like little plant tendrils with a mind of their own. I was actually looking for someone, I said. A hiker went missing about a week ago. Have you seen anyone else out here? Something flashed across Lawrence's face, a tiny smile he couldn't hide fast enough. It looked like satisfaction, like he was pleased to hear about the missing hiker. I'd be happy to help you search, he offered. I know this area better than anyone. As we walked through the forest, I noticed plants reacting to Lawrence in ways they shouldn't. Ferns turned toward him as we passed, like he was the sun. Vines seemed to reach out, almost touching him before pulling back. It started to rain lightly, but the strangest thing happened. The water flowed around Lawrence as if he was protected by an invisible umbrella. Not a single drop touched him. You know, Lawrence said as we walked, you've been doing very interesting work in the north section. Your fungal classification system is quite impressive. I stopped walking. How do you know about my work in the north section? I hadn't told anyone about that project, and it was miles from here in a restricted research area. Lawrence's smile didn't waver. Oh, word gets around. That night I set up camp near the ranger cabin. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Lawrence and all the impossible things I'd seen. I remembered something from the park's historical records, a journal entry from 1973 that mentioned a hiker named Lawrence who had guided several researchers into the deep forest. None of them were ever seen again. It couldn't be the same person. That was nearly 20 years ago. Around midnight, I heard movement outside my tent. Carefully, I peeked out and saw Lawrence walking into the forest. I grabbed my flashlight and followed at a safe distance. What I saw still haunts my dreams. In a small clearing lit by moonlight, Lawrence stopped and raised his arms. Then his body began to change. It was like he was melting, but instead of becoming a puddle, he spread out into the forest floor. His skin became moss, his hair turned into tiny ferns, his clothes dissolved into fungus. Within minutes, there was no Lawrence anymore, just a moving mass of plants that spread across the ground like a living carpet. I must have made a noise because suddenly the plant mass stopped moving. A section of it rose up, forming a shape that vaguely resembled a head. It turned in my direction. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, back to my tent, then past it to my truck. I drove straight to the ranger station and locked myself inside. The next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it all. Stress, lack of sleep, maybe I'd touched some hallucinogenic fungus without realizing it. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. I went back to the forest, telling myself I needed evidence before reporting anything. If I told my boss I'd seen a man turn into plants, they'd think I was crazy. Lawrence was waiting for me at the trailhead. "Good morning, Will," he said, smiling that same perfect smile. "Ready to continue our search?" I nodded, unable to find words. Up close, I could see tiny mushrooms growing at his hairline, half hidden but definitely there. "You know," Lawrence said as we walked, "I've been watching you for weeks. You're different from the others. You understand the forest. You respect it." "The others?" I asked, my mouth dry. "The backpacker you're looking for, the researchers before them. They took from the forest. They cut samples. They trampled roots. They treated this place like it was dead matter instead of a living being. And what happened to them?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Lawrence's smile widened. "They became part of something greater, part of us." He reached out and touched a tree trunk. The bark rippled like water. "You see, Will, this forest is more than just trees and plants growing near each other. It's one organism, one mind spread across thousands of bodies, connected through the roots, the spores, the very soil. and I am its voice. As he spoke, I noticed the ground around his feet sprouting new life, tiny mushrooms and moss growing in real time, spreading outward from where he stood. "What are you?" I whispered. "I am the forest," Lawrence replied. "Or rather, the forest is me. We are the same thing now. And Will," he leaned closer, his breath smelling of wet earth and decay, "we would like you to join us." I backed away from Lawrence, my mind racing. Join them, become part of whatever this thing was. "I need to think about this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lawrence nodded. "Of course, but don't take too long. The forest is growing impatient." I turned and walked away, moving as calmly as I could. As soon as I was out of sight, I started running toward the main trail. I had to get out, to warn someone, but after 20 minutes of running, I found myself back at the circular clearing with the spiral pattern. Somehow, the trails had changed. I tried another direction and another, but every path led back to the same spot. The forest had rearranged itself overnight. It was keeping me here. Lawrence stepped out from behind a tree, but he looked different. Now, parts of his face were melting away, revealing a mass of writhing vines and mushrooms underneath. He wasn't trying to look human anymore. "Join us willingly, Will," he said, his voice now sounding like rustling leaves. "It's better that way. You'll keep your thoughts, your memories. You'll become part of something ancient and powerful. The others fought us, and now they're just nutrients." "The others like the missing backpacker?" I asked, "and the researchers before them, and the loggers before them." Lawrence's half-human face smiled. "They're all here, in a way. Their knowledge is our knowledge now." To show me what he meant, Lawrence, or the thing pretending to be Lawrence, raised his arms. The ground rumbled, and then I saw something impossible. The trees around us pulled their roots from the soil and began to move, dragging themselves across the ground to block all possible escape routes. "You see," Lawrence said, "we are the forest. Every root, every leaf, every spore, and we're growing stronger." I was trapped. My mind raced, searching for a way out. That's when I heard someone calling my name. "Will, Will, are you out here?" I recognized that voice. Miguel Reyes, my research assistant. He must have come looking for me when I didn't check in. "Miguel!" "Stay back," I shouted, but it was too late. He emerged from between two trees, relief on his face when he spotted me. "There you are. Everyone's worried sick. You've been gone for 2 days," and he stopped mid-sentence when he saw Lawrence, whose body was now more plant than human. Before Miguel could run, vines shot out from Lawrence's arm, wrapping around my assistant's legs and pulling him forward. More vines and moss grew rapidly over Miguel's body as he screamed. I watched in horror as the plants began to sink into his skin, merging with him. "No!" I lunged forward, grabbing Miguel's hand, trying to pull him free, but the vines were too strong. As I struggled, my compass fell from my pocket. It landed on one of the vines, and something unexpected happened. The vine recoiled, as if in pain. The metal had hurt it somehow. A memory flashed in my mind. The metal fire breaks stored at my research station. Large sheets of metal used to help control forest fires. If the entity couldn't touch metal... "Lawrence, wait," I said, letting go. "Of Miguel." "You're right. I want to join you." The plant mass that used to be Lawrence paused. A wise choice. "But I need to get something first," I continued. "A book from my cabin. It contains all my research." "You'd want that knowledge, right?" Lawrence seemed to consider this. "You will return?" "I promise," I lied. "Just let me go get my book. And let Miguel go too. He's just a kid. He doesn't know anything valuable." "You will both return," Lawrence decided. "Or the forest will find you." The vines released Miguel, who collapsed to the ground, gasping. Plants had already started growing from his skin in small patches. "The trails will lead you to your cabin," Lawrence said. "But remember, we are watching." As promised, the paths cleared before us. I helped Miguel to his feet, and we hurried down the trail. "What's happening?" Miguel whispered, looking at the small ferns sprouting from his arm with terror. "I'll explain at the cabin," I said. "Just keep moving." When we reached my research station, I locked the door behind us and grabbed the first aid kit. "Listen carefully," I told Miguel, as I examined the plant growth on his skin. "That thing out there is some kind of collective plant organism. It's intelligent, and it's been absorbing people. Like it's trying to absorb me?" Miguel's voice shook as he looked at his arm. "Yes, but I think I found its weakness. It can't touch metal, recoils from it." I pulled out tweezers from the kit and carefully removed some of the plant material from Miguel's skin. It came away more easily than I expected, leaving red marks but no serious damage. It hadn't fully bonded with him yet. "We need the fire breaks," I said. "The big metal sheets in the storage shed." Miguel looked at me like I was crazy. "What good will those do?" "I think we can contain it, the main mass at least. It's centered in that clearing with the spiral. If we can surround it with metal..." "Even if that works, Will, what about the rest of the forest? You said it is the forest." "One problem at a time," I said. "First, we save ourselves and contain the central mass. Then we call in every scientist and government agency we can." We loaded as many metal sheets as we could into my truck. The sun was setting as we drove back toward the trail. I knew we had to hurry. The entity would know we weren't coming back with any book. As we got closer to the clearing, the forest seemed to sense our intentions. Branches reached down to block our path. Roots erupted from the ground to trip us. But we pressed on, dragging the heavy metal sheets behind us. Lawrence was waiting in the clearing, no longer even trying to look human. He was a writhing mass of plant life in roughly humanoid form, mushrooms and moss and vines all moving together as one organism. "You betrayed us," the Lawrence thing said, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You're killing people," I answered. "You have to be stopped." The entity laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "We aren't killing. We're evolving, becoming more. Humans are just another form of life to absorb, to learn from." "Not anymore," I said, and signaled to Miguel. We positioned the first metal sheet, driving it into the soft earth of the clearing. The entity screamed, a high, inhuman sound that made my ears hurt. It lashed out with vines and roots, but we were ready. We dodged and weaved, placing sheet after sheet in a circle around the central mass, but we were too slow. A vine whipped across my arm, leaving a deep scratch. Immediately, I felt a burning sensation as something entered my bloodstream. Spores. The entity was inside me now. "Will!" Miguel shouted. "Finish it!" I yelled back. "Complete the circle!" As Miguel placed the final sheet, the entity thrashed in agony, contained but not defeated. I could feel the spores moving through my body, burning like fire in my veins. "Go!" I told Miguel, who was staring at me in horror. "Get help. Tell them to burn it all. I'm not leaving you. You have to." I could feel the change starting already, a tingling in my fingertips as tiny root-like structures began to grow beneath my skin. "I'm already infected, but you can still get out." Miguel looked at me, tears in his eyes. Then he nodded once and ran. I sat down heavily on the forest floor, my back against one of the metal sheets. On the other side, the entity that called itself Lawrence raged and screamed. "You can't stop us," it hissed. "We're in you now. You'll become us." "Maybe," I whispered, pulling out my wooden flute. "But not today." I began to play, my fingers still human enough to find the notes, a song my father taught me about the cycle of life and death. As darkness fell over the forest, I played my last song as Will Uckerfer, wondering what I would become when the music ended. 6 months later, Karen Chen adjusted her new park ranger hat as she walked the trail. This was her first week on the job at Redwood National Park, and she was still learning the routes. The map showed this trail should connect to Cedar Ridge, but something seemed off. "That's strange," she muttered, stopping to check her compass. According to the map, she should be heading north, but her compass pointed in a completely different direction. A light mist hung between the giant trees, making the forest look magical in the morning light. Karen had loved these redwoods since she was a child, which is why she'd been so excited to get this job. I must have taken a wrong turn, she said to herself, turning around. That's when she noticed a small path she hadn't seen before. It wasn't on her map, but it looked well used. Curious, Karen followed it. After about 10 minutes, the path opened into a perfect circle of trees. Karen gasped. In all her years hiking these woods, she'd never seen anything like it. The vegetation here grew in perfect symmetry, like someone had designed it. Flowers, ferns, and mushrooms arranged in a spiral pattern leading to the center, but what stood in the middle made her heart skip a beat. It was a statue of a man, tall and strong-looking, made entirely of moss and fungus. The detail was incredible. She could make out every feature on his face, right down to a curved scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. His hand held what looked like a wooden flute, frozen in mid-play. Karen stepped closer, amazed by the craftsmanship. Who could have made something like this all the way out here? As she approached, she noticed something unsettling. Tiny drops of red liquid, like sap, were leaking from the statue's eyes, as if it were crying. "Hello?" she called out, wondering if the artist might be nearby. The forest went completely silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Karen reached out to touch the statue's hand. The moss felt strange, warm and slightly pulsing, like it had a heartbeat. She pulled her hand back quickly. As she did, she could have sworn the statue's fingers moved slightly. A rustling sound made her turn. A Forest Service backpack lay at the edge of the clearing, partially covered in moss. It looked like it had been there for months. Karen approached it cautiously and saw a name tag. W. Okafor. "Will Okafor?" she said aloud. She'd heard that name during her orientation. A ranger who had gone missing in the spring. There had been a huge search, but all they'd found was his truck parked at a remote trailhead. Karen looked back at the statue, a chill running down her spine. The face. It looked like the photo of Will they'd shown during training. But that was impossible. A soft sound floated through the air, the gentle notes of a wooden flute. But there was no one playing. The music seemed to come from the statue itself, or maybe from the trees all around. As Karen listened, frozen in place, tiny shoots of moss began to creep up around her boots, so slowly she didn't notice at first. The statue's eyes seemed to be looking right at her now, though she was sure they had been closed before. "This isn't real," Karen whispered to herself. "This can't be real." She backed away slowly, her heart pounding. As she reached the edge of the clearing, she glanced down and saw the moss that had begun to cover her boots. With a cry, she kicked it off and turned to run. Behind her, the music grew louder, more urgent. The path she had followed was gone. Just solid wall of trees where it had been moments before. Karen pulled out her radio. "Base, this is Ranger Chen. I need help. She looked around, trying to figure out where she was. "I'm in some kind of clearing. There's something weird here, something alive." Only static answered her. She tried again. "Base, please respond. There's something wrong with the forest. I found Ranger Okafor, or something that looks like him." More static. Then a voice broke. Udru. Not the voice of the ranger station, but a man's voice, gentle and sad. "They won't hear you," it said. "Not in this place." Karen spun around. The statue hadn't moved, but the voice seemed to come from it. "What are you?" she whispered. The moss on the statue's face shifted into a sad smile. "I was Will Okafor. Now I'm something more. Part of the forest. Part of it. But still me enough to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "It's growing stronger, the entity, the collective. It's contained for now, but the metal is corroding. It will break free soon. Karen took another step back. I don't understand. The forest is alive, Karen. Not like we thought. It thinks, it learns, it absorbs. The statue's hand moved slightly, gesturing to itself. This is what's left of me, enough humanity to remember, to warn others. How do you know my name? Karen's voice trembled. The forest knows, it watches, listens. The statue, Will, raised its moss-covered hand. You need to go, now, before it realizes I'm helping you. Follow the music, it will lead you out. The flute music changed, becoming more directional. It seemed to be coming from Karen's left. But what about you? Karen asked. The statue's face rippled with what looked like pain. There is no me anymore. Not really, just memories, fighting to protect others from my fate. Red sap tears flowed faster now. Go. Tell them to burn this section, it's the only way. Karen hesitated, then turned and ran in the direction of the music. Behind her, she heard a horrible sound, like tearing fabric but wetter, organic. She didn't look back. The music led her, through impossible turns, past trees that seemed to reach for her, but always just missed. Finally, she burst out onto a main trail, recognized it as Redwood Loop. She ran all the way back to the ranger station, gasping for breath as she pushed through the door. I found him, she panted. I found Will Okafor. The other rangers stared at her in confusion. Karen, are you okay? Asked Jim, the head ranger. You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, she said. Something worse. She told them everything, the clearing, the statue, the voice, the warning. As she spoke, she noticed tiny spots of green on her hands where she had touched the moss statue. Tiny circles of moss were growing on her skin. Jim called in experts from the university. They came, with hazmat suits and equipment, following Karen back to where she thought the clearing was. But they never found it. The forest had hidden it again. Karen was put on medical leave. The moss on her hands was removed and studied, but under the microscope, it looked like normal moss. The doctors told her it was stress, imagination, maybe a reaction to something she'd touched in the forest. But sometimes at night, Karen hears flute music drifting through her window. And in the morning, she often finds tiny patches of moss growing on her pillow, no matter how many times she changes it. And deep in Redwood National Park, in a clearing that doesn't appear on any map, a statue made of moss stands guard over a metal circle that's slowly rusting away. Red tears drip from its eyes as it plays a wooden flute, warning those who can hear it to stay away. Because in this ancient forest, something is growing. Something old and patient and hungry. Something that was once many, but is becoming one. Something that waits for the day the metal finally breaks down and it can feed again. My name is Catherine Sullivan, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a park ranger at Glacier National Park for almost 10 years now. The mountains here in Montana have become my home, my real home, more than any place with 4 walls and a roof could ever be. Tonight, I'm finishing up my last patrol along the eastern edge of the park. The sun is going down, painting the sky in deep purples and bright oranges. It looks like someone spilled a box of crayons across the clouds. All those colors bounce off the frozen lakes below, making the whole world look magical. I shine my flashlight. Ahead, as tiny snowflakes dance in its beam. It's way colder than it should be for this time of year. About 20 degrees below normal, and the temperature keeps dropping. I can see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face every time I exhale. The winter forest has its own special sounds. The snow crunches under my heavy boots with each step. Sometimes I hear a branch crack when too much ice builds up on it. Far away, a lone wolf calls out, its howl echoing between the mountains. I stop at one of my favorite spots, an overlook that gives me a perfect view of the valley. This is why I love winter in the park. The tourists are all gone, and I have this incredible beauty all to myself. Just me and the mountains and the silence. It heals something deep inside me that I thought would stay broken forever. The radio on my belt makes a crackling sound, startling me from my thoughts. It's the weather. Service with an update. Attention all park personnel. The approaching storm system has accelerated. Blizzard conditions now expected within 2 to 3 hours. Winds up to 60 miles per hour. Whiteout conditions likely. All patrols should return to base immediately. Over. I click the talk button. Sullivan here, copy that. I'm about 40 minutes from the eastern outpost. We'll head in now, over. As the daylight fades into twilight, something catches my eye. Along the trail ahead, the ice doesn't look right. Instead of random icicles and frost, I see perfect geometric shapes spiraling up from the ground. They look like frozen fingers reaching toward the darkening sky. I've been in these mountains my whole adult life, and I've never seen ice form like this before. I stop walking and just listen. Something's not right. The forest is too quiet. The winter birds that usually chirp and flutter among the pine branches are missing. Even the wind seems to have died down to nothing. My gut tightens with that familiar feeling, the one that kept me alive in Vietnam. Something's wrong, then I hear it. A sound drifting across the snow. It's unlike anything I've ever heard before. Part singing, part crying. It's too musical to be an animal, but it doesn't sound human either. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'm about to radio it in when my device crackles again. This time it's not the weather service. Mayday, mayday! This is climbing team Delta at Dragon's Tooth Peak. We're stuck at the north face. There's something wrong with the ice up here. The routes are all blocked by... I don't know how to describe it. The ice formations aren't natural. We need immediate assistance. Temperature dropping rapidly. Over. I recognize the voice. It's Mike Chen, one of the most experienced climbers I know. If he's spooked, it's serious. I press the talk button. This is Ranger Sullivan. I copy your distress call, Team Delta. Be advised, severe weather approaching. What's your status? Any injuries? Over. The radio crackles with static before Mike's voice returns, sounding even more stressed than before. No injuries yet, but Sarah says the temperature has dropped another 15 degrees in just the last 10 minutes. That's not natural, Kate, and the ice... It's moving. I swear it's moving when we're not looking at it. We need help now. I look up at the darkening sky. The storm is coming in fast, and I know I should head back. But there are 4 people up on that mountain who might not survive the night without help. Hang tight, Delta. I'm on my way. Keep your radio on. Over. As I change direction and start heading toward Dragon's Tooth Peak, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I grip my flashlight tighter and increase my pace, the unnatural. Ice formations seeming to multiply along the path ahead. I've faced blizzards, bears, and avalanches in these mountains. But for the first time in years, I feel afraid, and I don't know why. As I hike toward Dragon's Tooth Peak, my old shoulder injury starts to ache. It always does when the temperature drops this low. The scars on my left shoulder and back feel tight under my layers of clothing, a permanent reminder of my past life. Before I became a ranger, I was a combat medic in Vietnam. I still remember the heat and humidity there, so different from the freezing cold of these mountains. I was supposed to save lives, and I did save many, but I couldn't save them all. Sometimes at night, I still hear the sounds of helicopters and people shouting for help. The mountains helped me heal in a way that nothing else could. After I came back from the war, I couldn't handle being around crowds or loud noises. But out here, with just the wind and the trees and the distant call of animals, my mind finally found some peace. I touched the silver pendant hanging around my neck, a simple mountain peak shape. It was a gift from my brother Sam before he disappeared. In these same mountains 7 years ago, they never found his body. Sometimes I think that's why I stay here, like maybe one day I'll find some trace of him, some clue about what happened. The snow is getting deeper as I climb higher, but my body is strong from years of mountain rescues. People at the ranger station call me stubborn. They say I take too many risks, especially in winter. But I've brought 26 people home safely from winter rescues that other rangers thought were impossible. That's all that matters to me. I stop to check my compass and map. Something doesn't look right. According to the map, there should be a large rock formation to my right, but it's not there. Either the map is wrong or I'm not where I think I am. That's impossible, though. I know every inch of this park. The wind picks up, blowing snow into my face. I've always had a weird talent for finding my way in bad weather. The local Blackfeet people call it snow sight, like I have some special connection to the mountain that helps me see paths others can't. I don't know about that, but I do know that when others get disoriented in a whiteout, I can still somehow sense which way to go. Tonight, though, something feels off. The mountain doesn't feel familiar. It's like trying to recognize an old friend who's had plastic surgery. It looks almost right, but something important has changed. The wind carries that strange singing sound again. It makes me think of the 3 rescues I failed, the faces of the people I couldn't save. Jenny Larson trapped under an avalanche back in '68, the Hoffman brothers caught in a sudden storm in '70. I found them all too late. Their faces visit me in my dreams, especially in winter. I shake the thoughts away and keep moving. The stranded climbers need me focused, not lost in old memories. But I can't help wondering if I'll find them in time, or if they'll be joining the faces in my nightmares. This rescue feels different from the others. Something about those ice formations Mike described. It reminds me of the strange shapes I saw on the trail earlier, and that singing, it's getting louder as I climb higher, though it seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As night fully sets in, I turn on my headlamp. The cold bites at my exposed skin, but I'm used to it. People think I'm strange for preferring the honest dangers of wilderness to the complications of the city. Out here, threats are simple. Cold, hunger, gravity. People are much harder to predict. Check my radio again. Team Delta, this is Ranger Sullivan. What's your exact position? Over. There's only static in response. I try again, but nothing comes through. Either their radio has died or something is blocking the signal. I look up at the mountain peak looming above me. Dragon's Tooth looks sharper than usual against the night sky, its jagged outline reminding me of teeth in an open mouth. I have to keep going. Those climbers are counting on me, and I refuse to add 4 more faces to my nightmares. The higher I climb, the stranger things get. I spot footprints in the snow, normal human boot prints at first, but as I follow them, they start to change. They get longer, like whoever made them was suddenly taking huge steps. And then, the weirdest thing happens. They just end. Not like someone turned around or jumped. They just stop right where the snow meets a solid wall of ice, like whoever made them walked straight into the frozen surface and disappeared. I check my thermometer. It reads 40 degrees so, which can't be right. That's way too cold, even for a bad winter storm in Glacier, and it's still dropping. My special cold weather gear is good, but not for temperatures this extreme. I need to find those climbers fast. I pull out my GPS unit to double-check my location, but the screen shows coordinates that make no sense. According to this, I'm somewhere in Canada, hundreds of miles north. I tap the device and restart it, but the readings get even stranger. Now it says I'm in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Either my GPS is broken, or something is messing with the signal. Great, I mutter, putting it away. I'll have to rely on my own sense of direction. My name is Diane Vasquez, and I've spent 15 years working as a park ranger in the cool darkness of Carlsbad Caverns. These limestone caves in New Mexico have been my second home for a long time now. Most people get scared of dark places, underground, but not me. At least, that's what I always thought. Today started like any other day. I walked down the main path into the caves, my flashlight lighting up the way ahead. The caves always make these wonderful dripping sounds. Water falling from the pointy rocks hanging from the ceiling that we call stalactites. The drops hit the ground with little plops that echo all around, like nature's own music. My flashlight beam caught the cave walls, making them sparkle with tiny rainbows. The walls down here are always wet and shiny, and when light hits them just right, they look magical. I've seen this 1,000 times, but it still makes me smile. Looking up, I spotted our bat friends. Hundreds of them were sleeping upside down in a crack in the high ceiling. They were all bunched together, tiny, furry bodies taking a nap until nighttime when they'd fly out to eat insects. As I kept walking deeper into the cave, the air got colder and damper. I could feel the moisture on my skin. I was checking the safety lights we'd just put in along the path where tourists walk. Everything seemed fine so far. Last week we felt the ground shake a little bit. Nothing dangerous, but enough to get our attention. When our team checked afterward, we found something exciting. This earthquake had cracked open a wall and showed us a narrow passage we never knew existed. Our cave scientists were super eager to explore it, and honestly, so was I. But then I saw something strange on the cave floor. There were marks in the dirt, like something had been dragged through it. At first, I thought maybe it was from our equipment, but these marks were different. They didn't look like anything I'd seen before in all my years working here. The deeper I went into the caves, the weirder I felt. Usually these dark spaces feel peaceful to me, like an old friend. But today, something felt off. The darkness seemed thicker somehow, like it was pressing in on me. For the first time ever, I felt a knot in my stomach, a warning feeling I couldn't explain. I tried to radio back to the visitor center, but the deeper I went, the worse the connection got. At first it was just static, but then it turned into this high-pitched sound that hurt my ears and made my teeth feel funny. Something wasn't right in the caves today. And despite all my years of experience, all my comfort in these underground passages, a voice in the back of my mind was telling me to turn around, to head back to the surface while I still could. But I didn't listen, and that was my first mistake. I guess I should tell you a bit about myself. I'm 42 years old, and I've loved caves since I was a little girl. My dad was a cave scientist, a geologist, they call it. He used to take me exploring in the small desert caves all around New Mexico. By the time I was 12, I knew more about what's under the ground than most grown-ups. I'm not very tall, but I'm strong and skinny, which is pretty good for a cave explorer. Some of the tunnels down here are really tight, and bigger people can't squeeze through them. My size has saved me more than once when I needed to get through a narrow spot. My hand went to the small silver medal hanging around my neck, St. Barbara, who watches over miners and people who work underground. My dad gave it to me on my first day as a park ranger. He's gone now, but I still feel like he's with me when I touch it. In my backpack, I always carry my special notebook. It's full of maps I've drawn by hand of all the lesser-known parts of the cave. Some spots aren't on the official maps, but they're in my book. It's like my own secret guide to Carlsbad that I've been working on for 15 years. Lately, I've been spending even more time down here, in the quiet darkness. 3 months ago, my husband Tom and I got divorced, 17 years of marriage done. The silence of the caves helps me think, helps me forget about going home to an empty house. As I walked deeper, checking the safety lights, I remembered the family I saved 3 years back. A small rock slide had blocked their way out, and the mom had broken her ankle. I found a tiny gap that only I could fit through, and I got help to them before the little one's asthma got too bad. The park gave me an award for bravery, but honestly, I was just doing my job. Something about the tunnel ahead didn't look right. I've been walking these paths for so long that I notice even tiny changes. The shape of that rock formation seemed different somehow. Had something moved it? That shouldn't be possible. These formations take thousands of years to grow even an inch. I know my co-workers worry about me sometimes. Diane goes too far on her own, they say. One day she'll get in trouble with no backup. Maybe they're right, but I've always felt safe down here. Until today. The funny thing is, when I was young, small spaces used to scare me. I'd get all sweaty and panicky if I felt trapped. I've spent my whole career fighting that fear, pushing it down deep inside me. Usually I win that fight, but today, as the passage got narrower, I could feel that old fear bubbling up again. One thing that's always helped me in the caves is my good ears. I can tell which way to go just by the echoes of my footsteps or the dripping water. Each chamber has its own special sound, like a fingerprint made of echoes. But today, the sound seemed wrong somehow. Echoes came back from places where there shouldn't be any space. It was like the cave itself was changing around me. I stopped and listened carefully. The drip seemed faster now, more urgent. And underneath them, I thought I heard something else. Something that didn't belong in a cave at all. I moved closer to the newly found crack in the wall, the one the earthquake had opened up. That's when I heard it, a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It was like whispers mixed with scratching, like hundreds of tiny claws scraping on rock. Caves aren't supposed to make sounds like that. Shining my flashlight around, something caught my eye. Stuck in the wall was an old Park Service radio, the kind they used back in the 1950s. It was halfway buried in the flowstone. That's the smooth rock that forms when minerals in the water build up over time. For that radio to be that deeply embedded, it must have been there for decades. But how did it get there? And who did it belong to? I continued my inspection of the tourist path lights and noticed they were starting to dim and flicker. That was weird. We had just put in fresh batteries yesterday. They should have lasted at least a week. The ground near the new crack caught my attention. There were footprints in the soft silt of the cave floor. They started out looking normal, like someone wearing boots. But as they got closer to the crack, they changed. The front of the prints got longer, like whoever made them had started to drag their feet, or like their feet were stretching out somehow. I told myself it must be a trick of how the dirt had fallen, but deep down I wasn't convinced. It was cold down here, always is. But as I got closer to the new passage, the temperature dropped so much I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. That shouldn't happen hundreds of feet underground in the New Mexico desert. The temperature in caves usually stays the same all year round. I pulled out my compass to mark the direction of the new passage in my notebook, but the needle just spun wildly round and round. My mapping tools went crazy too when I pointed them toward the crack. It was like something was messing with anything electronic or magnetic. A bit further on, I found something that made my stomach twist. It was Mike's hard hat. He's one of our maintenance guys. It was lying on the ground next to his tools, but the tools weren't scattered like he'd dropped them in a hurry. They were arranged in a perfect circle, like someone had placed them that way on purpose. Mike had checked in for work this morning. Where was he now? Suddenly, there was a rush of air and squeaking sounds above me. I looked up to see the bats, all of them, flying in a panic toward the cave exits. This was all wrong. Bats don't fly in the daytime unless something scares them badly. My light fell on the wall near the new crack, and I saw something growing there. At first I thought it was cave mold or lichen, but this was different. It looked almost alive. When my light hit it, it seemed to pulse slightly, like it was breathing. That's when my flashlight caught something moving. Just for a second, I saw something pale and long slip into a crack in the wall. It moved so fast and smooth, like water flowing. It was too big to be a cave rat or any animal that should be down here. And it definitely wasn't human. I should have turned back right then. Every bit of my experience, every instinct was screaming at me to head for the surface. But instead, I took a step closer to the new passage. "Hello?" I called out. "Mike, is that you?" The only answer was my own voice echoing back at me, and underneath it that strange scratching sound, now a little louder than before. "Diane!" I froze. Someone had whispered my name from the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. The voice sounded exactly like Tom, my ex-husband, but that was impossible. Tom had never been to this part of the cave. He hated tight spaces and barely came to the main tourist areas when we were married. "Tom," I called out, knowing it couldn't be him. I pointed my flashlight toward where the voice had come from, and that's when I saw it. Not fully, just parts of it in the edge of my light. It was pale white, like something that had never seen the sun. It looked almost human-shaped, but wrong. Its arms and legs were way too long, and they bent in places where joints shouldn't be. Its skin was so thin I could see dark lines running beneath it like veins, and it had no eyes. Where eyes should have been, there was just smooth, pale skins. I pointed my light directly at it. My flashlight started to dim, like the batteries were suddenly dying, or like the thing was somehow sucking the electricity right out of it. It moved then, sliding into a crack in the wall that couldn't have been more than 2 inches wide. I thought there was no way it could fit, but it did. Its body squeezing and stretching like it was made of putty instead of flesh and bone. Then, a few seconds later, I saw it reform on the other side of the crack, pulling itself back into that almost human shape. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Diane, we need help. We're trapped in the echo chamber. Please respond." It was Jeff's voice, one of my fellow rangers. The echo chamber was deeper in the unmapped section of caves. "Jeff, what are you doing down there? That area isn't safe." I responded, but got only static in return. Then another voice. "Diane, help! We can't find our way out." This time it was Lisa from the visitor center. Something wasn't right. Lisa was supposed to be at the front desk today, not in the caves at all. And the voices, they were too perfect, too clear despite the static. I realized then that the thing was mimicking my colleagues' voices, trying to lure me deeper into the caves. I turned around, intending to head back to the surface and get help. That's when I saw a small opening I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a chamber filled with park service equipment, old helmets, radios, tools, dating all the way back to the 1930s when the caverns first opened to tourists. Some had name tags. The names matched people who, according to old park records, had gone missing over the years. This thing, whatever it was, had been hunting here for generations. Movement caught my eye again. Not in one place, but several. The creature seemed to be in multiple passages at once, making me wonder if there was more than one of them. They were herding me, I realized. Each time I tried to move toward the exit, one would appear, forcing me to go deeper into the cave. Instead, I climbed over a sharp rock formation and felt a sting on my palm. Looking down, I saw I'd cut myself. Blood welled up from the small cut. Immediately, the air filled with those clicking sounds, louder now and coming from all directions. The creatures became frenzied, moving faster, appearing more frequently. They could smell my blood, I realized. They were hunting me by scent. The clicking noises weren't random. They were echolocation, like bats use. These things were mapping the cave with sound, tracking my every move with terrifying accuracy. I was being manipulated, I realized. Every time I thought I was heading back toward the main tourist cave, one of these things would appear, forcing me to change direction. They weren't just chasing me, they were driving me toward that newly discovered passage. What waited for me there? I clutched my St. Barbara medallion and whispered, "Dad, if you're watching over me, I could really use some help right now." The pale creatures moved closer, surrounding me, herding me toward the darkness of the unknown passage. I was completely lost now. The caves I'd known for 15 years suddenly felt alien and confusing. Sounds bounced off the walls all wrong. Echoes came from directions that made no sense. When I thought I was heading toward the main cave, the echoes told me I was going deeper instead. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I heard real voices calling my name. "Diane!" "Where? Are you?" It was a rescue team. Jeff, Miguel, and Kevin, the new guy who'd only been with us for 3 months. They must have come looking for me when I didn't check in on time. "I'm here!" I shouted. "Be careful! There's something down here!" We found each other in a larger chamber, their flashlights cutting through the darkness toward me. The relief I felt seeing their familiar faces almost made me cry. "What's going on?" Jeff asked. "Your radio kept sending out weird messages." "It wasn't me," I tried to explain. "There's something down here that can mimic voices. It's been trying to lead me deeper into the cave." I could tell they didn't fully believe me. Would I have believed it if someone told me? "We need to get back to the surface," I said. Now. That's when it happened. One by one, their flashlights began to flicker and die. First Miguel's, then Jeff's. Kevin's lasted the longest, but soon we were standing in complete darkness. "Everyone hold hands," I ordered. "Don't let go." But in the panic and confusion, we got separated. I could hear the others calling out, their voices growing more distant as they stumbled around in the pitch black. "It's hunting us," I shouted. "It disables the lights first, then attacks in the dark." I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear those clicking sounds all around us, getting closer. The creatures were circling us in the darkness, where they had all the advantage. My hand went to my neck, feeling for my St. Barbara medallion. As my fingers touched the silver, I heard a hissing sound nearby, like something in pain. On a hunch, I pulled the medallion off my neck and held it out in front of me. I heard that hissing again, and the clicking sounds moved away slightly. "The silver," I called out. "They don't like silver," I tried to think. Where were we in the cave system? If I could figure that out, maybe I could lead us to safety. There was a chamber not far from here that had a natural light source, a thin crack in the ceiling that let in a ray of sunlight during the day. "Jeff, Miguel, Kevin," I shouted. "Head toward my voice. We need to stick together." I could hear them stumbling toward me in the dark. As they got closer, I grabbed their hands. "I think I know where we are," I said. "There's a chamber with natural light not far from here. If we can get there, we might have a chance." Using everything I knew about the cave system, every detail I'd recorded in my notebook over the years, I tried to guide us through the darkness. The silver medallion in my hand seemed to keep the creatures at bay, at least for now. We were so close to the chamber with light when it happened. The clicking sounds suddenly intensified, and something shot out of the darkness right in front of us. It was fully visible now, a nightmare come to life. The creature was pale and twisted, with dozens of jointed limbs sprouting from its body. Its face was almost human, but its jaw unhinged like a snake's, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Kevin screamed as one of the creature's limbs wrapped around his ankle. Before any of us could grab him, he was yanked backward into a narrow crack in the wall. "Help me!" His scream echoed through the caverns, then suddenly stopped. "Run!" I shouted to Jeff and Miguel. "The light chamber is just ahead." We sprinted forward, the creatures right behind us. I could feel their cold breath on my neck, hear their clicking and scratching just inches away. Finally, we burst into the chamber. A thin beam of daylight cut through the darkness from a crack far above us. It wasn't much, but the creatures seemed hesitant to enter the light. "There's a tight passage on the far side," I gasped, pointing. "It leads to the main tourist cave." "You two go first." "What about you?" Miguel asked. "I'll hold them off with the medallion," I said. "Go!" Jeff and Miguel squeezed into the narrow passage. I stood at the entrance, my silver medallion held out before me like a shield. The creatures circled in the shadows just beyond the light, clicking and whispering in voices that weren't there. "Own!" One of them darted forward faster than I could react. I felt a sharp pain as its claws raked across my stomach. Warm blood soaked through my shirt. In desperation, I lunged forward and jammed my medallion into the creature's throat. It let out a horrible shriek and began to convulse violently. With the last of my strength, I dragged myself into the narrow passage after Jeff and Miguel. The light was fading from my eyes, but I could see the main cave just ahead. Safety was so close. I don't remember much after that. Jeff told me later that They dragged me through the passage and got me to the surface. The park medics worked on me for what seemed like hours before the helicopter came to take me to the hospital in Carlsbad. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. The wounds on my stomach were deep, but somehow they missed anything vital. When they asked what happened, the official story was that I'd fallen onto sharp rocks during a cave inspection. Who would believe the truth? I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. During that time, search parties went looking for Kevin, but they never found him. They sealed off the passage where we'd last seen him with warning signs, but they kept the caves open for tourists. Money. Talks, I guess. When I finally went back to work, things had changed. The park superintendent called it a reorganization, but really, they didn't want me leading tours anymore. Too many questions about my scars, about what really happened down there. So now I work in the visitor center, answering questions about stalagmites and the bat colony. 1 month after I returned, 3 geology students went missing during an approved research expedition. They'd been studying the area near the newly discovered passage. The search parties found their equipment neatly arranged in a perfect circle. That was when they finally decided to permanently seal the passage. They brought in tons of concrete and closed it off completely. Said it was structurally unsound. I still work at the caverns. I know, it sounds crazy after what happened. But where else would I go? What else would I do? The caves have been my life, and someone needs to be here who knows the truth, who can watch for the signs. Sometimes the tour guides come to me with strange stories. They say when they pass near the concrete barrier, they hear a woman's voice calling for help from the other side. My voice, they say. And when they get close to listen, their flashlights always fail. I tell them it's just the wind in the caves playing tricks. What else can I say? But at night, when the tourists have gone home and the caves are quiet, I sit in the empty visitor center and touch the scars on my stomach. They've healed, but they still ache when it rains or when the barometric pressure changes. Like right now, like it does before an earthquake. Last week, one of the maintenance guys reported hearing scratching sounds coming from behind the concrete barrier. Faint, but getting louder each day, like something is trying to dig its way out. Nobody believed. Him, of course, but I did. So tonight, after everyone goes home, I'll go down there myself. I've got a new silver medallion, bigger this time. And I've made a few other preparations too. If those things are trying to find another way out, someone has to stop them. Someone who knows what they are, what they can do. Someone like me. I just hope I'm strong enough this time, because the clicking sounds in the caves have started again. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the visitor center, I can hear Kevin's voice calling my name from somewhere deep below. My name is Vincent Delacroix, but everyone calls me Vince. I've been a park ranger here in the Okefenokee swamp for 12 years now, and there's no place on earth I'd rather be. Well, at least that's what I used to think. It was just after sunrise, when it all began. I was guiding my airboat through the dark water channels, watching the pink-orange light of dawn reflect off the surface. The morning was so quiet and peaceful. Times like these, it feels like I'm the only person left in the world. The Spanish moss hung down from the old cypress trees like ghost curtains, dipping their long fingers into the still water. I've seen this sight 1,000 times, but it never gets old. As I moved deeper into the swamp, I noticed a few alligators sunning themselves on logs sticking out of the water. They barely looked my way as I passed. After all these years, they know me well enough. I love the sounds of the swamp in the morning, frogs croaking, insects buzzing, and birds singing their morning songs. It's like nature's own special music, that changes with the seasons but is always beautiful. I cut the engine on my airboat in a faraway section of the swamp. I needed to check some water readings, part of a new project we're doing, to track pollution levels. As the boat drifted to a stop, the gentle rocking was almost enough to make me sleepy. That's when I first noticed the smell. It hit me suddenly. A terrible stink like rotten eggs mixed with skunk spray and dead animals. It was so strong my eyes started watering. In all my years in the swamp, I'd never smelled anything like it. Then something even stranger happened. All the sounds of the swamp, all those frogs and birds and insects, they just stopped. Complete silence fell over everything. The quiet made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something wasn't right. I scanned the water around me and saw ripples in the distance. Something big was moving out there, too big to be an alligator, but moving with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. When I steered my boat toward a nearby mudbank, I spotted unusual tracks in the soft ground. They had 5 toes and were almost 20 inches long. In all my years studying the animals in this swamp, I'd never seen tracks like these before. I grabbed my radio to call back to the ranger station, but all I got was broken pieces of conversation. I could make out words about missing fishermen and strange sightings before the radio turned to static. That's when I first felt it, the feeling of being watched. Not by anything normal that belongs in the swamp, but by something else. Something that didn't belong here, and deep down I had a sinking feeling that whatever left those tracks was still nearby, hiding in the shadows of the cypress trees, waiting and watching. I didn't know it then, but that morning was just the beginning. The beginning of a nightmare that would change everything I thought I knew about the Okefenokee swamp and about what might be hiding in its darkest corners. I wasn't always a park ranger. When I was younger, I studied animals for a living, mostly the big scary ones that sit at the top of the food chain. I grew up in the bayous of Louisiana, where my Cajun family taught me all about life in the wetlands. My grandmother used to say I had swamp water in my veins instead of blood. My face tells the story of my 44 years on this earth, wrinkles around my eyes from squinting in the sun and laugh lines from the good times. But most people notice my eyes first, always watching, always alert. You don't survive this long in wild places by letting your guard down. I left my university job years ago after finding signs of a creature that shouldn't exist. When I showed my fellow scientists, they laughed and said I was seeing things. That's when I knew I needed to be out here, where I could search for answers myself. Around my neck, I wear a small leather pouch filled with dried herbs and tiny bones. A gree-gree charm my grandmother gave me for protection. There are things in the swamp older than the land itself, she'd warn me. Things that don't want to be found. As a child, I thought they were just stories to keep me from wandering too far. Now, I'm not so sure. My right leg tells another story. The scars running from ankle to hip came from an alligator attack when I was just 10 years old. The doctors said I might never walk right again, but I worked hard every day until my limp was barely noticeable. Still, on cold mornings like today, my leg aches and reminds me who really rules these waters. The local tribes respect me more than the other rangers. I listen to their stories and believe their warnings about the swamp. They've lived alongside these waters for generations, and they know things no science book could ever teach you. I keep notebooks filled with things I've seen out here that don't make sense. Strange tracks, weird sounds, and sightings that shouldn't be possible. My official reports leave these details out. The Park Service doesn't want to hear about things they can't explain. My fellow rangers call me Swamp Whisperer because I seem to know what the animals are thinking before they act. This gift has helped me save many lives over the years. I can sense when something isn't right, like now. Being out here comes with a price. My wife left 5 years ago, taking our daughter with her. "You care more about that swamp than you do about us," were her last words to me. She wasn't wrong. On quiet nights at the ranger station, their absence feels like a physical pain in my chest. But something keeps pulling me back to these waters, day after day. As I steered my airboat back toward the main channel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in my swamp. The strange tracks, the horrible smell, the unnatural silence. They all added up to something I'd been both dreading and hoping to find my entire career. I checked my watch. Nearly noon. The sun was high overhead, burning away the morning mist. But a chill remained deep in my bones. Whatever was out there, it was watching me. And I had the sinking feeling it had been watching me for a long, long time. My radio crackled to life. "Vince, you copy. We've got reports of a missing fishing boat near your sector. 2 men, father and son, didn't come back last night. Wife's worried sick." I pressed the talk button. "Copy that. I'm heading that way now." I pushed the throttle forward, the airboat skimming across the water as I headed toward where the fishermen were last seen. But deep down, I already knew what I was going to find. Or rather, what I wasn't going to find. Because whatever left those tracks was hungry. And it wasn't finished yet. I found the missing fishing boat about an hour later. It was just sitting there in a small cove, looking perfectly fine. The engine was still warm to the touch. Fishing poles were neatly lined up along the side. There was even a half-eaten sandwich on one of the seats. But the fishermen, the father and son, were nowhere to be found. No footprints leading away from the boat. No signs that they had fought or struggled with anything. They had simply vanished. I radioed back to the station. Found the boat. No sign of the people. Something's not right here. As I was checking, around the area, I spotted something floating in the water nearby. I steered my airboat closer and felt my stomach drop. 3 dead alligators were floating belly up in the water. I've seen plenty of dead gators in my time, but never like this. Each one had neat, clean holes at their necks and legs, right where the big blood vessels would be. Whatever killed them had drained all their blood with surgical precision. That's not something a normal predator does, not something natural. Over the next few days, I noticed other strange things happening in the swamp. All the animals, deer, birds, even the snakes, were moving away from certain areas. These were perfect spots for them to live, with plenty of food and shelter, but they were leaving like there was a forest fire coming. Except there wasn't any fire. They were running from something only they could sense. While checking one of the abandoned areas, I found something caught on a cypress knee, a clump of coarse, reddish-brown hair. It didn't match any animal I knew from the swamp. I sealed it in a plastic bag and sent it to the lab for testing. A week later, the results came back. Unknown primate species, sample contaminated with human DNA. The lab tech suggested it was probably just some hiker's hair mixed with mud or plant material, but I knew better. One morning I found strange footprints circling my ranger station. They looked almost human, but much larger and deep, like whatever made them weighed hundreds of pounds. The tracks circled the entire building before heading back into the swamp. It felt like something had been checking me out, studying my habits. That horrible smell kept coming back too. Every evening as the sun went down, the stink would roll in like clockwork. That mix of rotten eggs, skunk spray, and decay that made my eyes water. By morning, it would be gone without a trace. I set up trail cameras around my station and in the areas where the strange things were happening. Most of the footage showed nothing unusual, just normal swamp life. But one camera caught something that sent chills down my spine, a massive shadow moving between the trees. It walked on 2 legs but hunched over, its proportions all wrong for a human. The image was blurry, but clear enough to know this was no bear or known animal. The strangest thing happened when I took Doug's hunting dogs out to search for the missing fisherman. Those dogs have tracked wounded deer through miles of swamp before, but when we approached certain areas, they just stopped. Their tails went between their legs, and they started whining and growling. When I tried to push forward, one of the dogs, the bravest one I know, actually bit at my hand, trying to pull me back. They knew something was there, something they feared. While patrolling some of these dead zones, as I started calling them, I began getting terrible headaches and seeing strange shapes at the edge of my vision. At first, I thought I was getting sick, or maybe the stress was getting to me. But the symptoms always disappeared as soon as I left those areas. The most disturbing incident happened when Dr. Morrow, a plant scientist from the university, came to collect samples. She went out alone for what should have been a 3-hour trip and didn't return until late that night. When we found her, she was just sitting in her boat, staring at nothing. She had no memory of the missing 12 hours. For days afterward, she acted strange, jumping at shadows, speaking in whispers, and constantly looking over her shoulder. She left the research project early, refusing to explain why. That night, after Dr. Morrow left, I sat on the porch of my station with my shotgun across my lap. The usual chorus of frogs and insects was silent again. The smell was stronger than ever. In the darkness beyond the reach of my porch light, something moved, something big, and I knew it was finally ready to show itself. It was just after sunset, when I heard strange noises coming from the thick cypress grove about a quarter-mile from my station. Splashing sounds, followed by low grunts that didn't match any swamp creature I knew. I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun and headed out to investigate. The air was still and heavy with humidity as I eased my airboat through the water. I cut the engine about 50 yards from where I'd heard the noises and used my paddle to move forward silently. The smell hit me again, stronger than ever before, making my eyes water and my stomach turn. As I rounded a bend between two ancient cypress trees, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow, something my mind was making up from the shapes of branches and hanging moss. But then it moved. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, and covered in matted reddish-brown fur. Its arms were unnaturally long, hanging almost to its knees. The creature was moving between the trees with a grace that seemed impossible for something so big, like it belonged here more than I did. I froze, my hand tightening on my shotgun. The beam of my flashlight caught its massive shoulders as it turned, and 2 eyes reflected back at me, glowing red in the darkness. Its face stayed hidden in shadow, but I could feel it looking right at me. Then it made a sound that turned my blood to ice, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the water, through the trees, through my whole body. It wasn't just a sound. It was something I could feel in my chest, triggering a kind of fear I'd never experienced before, not even when that gator had my leg in its jaws all those years ago. This was older, deeper, like my body remembered something my mind had forgotten. I backed the boat away slowly, keeping my light on the creature. It didn't chase me, but it didn't retreat either. It just watched me go. The next morning, I returned to the spot in daylight. The creature was gone, but it had left something behind. The leaves and branches it had touched were covered in a strange, oily substance. I collected some in a sample jar, careful not to get it on my skin. Later, when I secretly sent it to a scientist friend, he called it a complex neurotoxin, something that could cause hallucinations and eventually paralyze whoever touched it. That explained what happened to Dr. Morrow, and maybe the missing fisherman too. A few days later, my airboat wouldn't start. At first, I thought it was just mechanical trouble, but when I checked the engine, I realized someone, or something, had removed specific parts. Not just broken them, but carefully. Taken them out. This wasn't random damage. This was deliberate. That's when I realized the creature was smart, really smart, and it was testing me. Over the next week, I kept seeing it, never for long, just glimpses. It would show itself, then disappear, watching how I reacted, like I was the one being studied. One night, while patrolling near where the fishing boat had been found, I heard voices calling for help. "Hello, is someone there? Please help us." They sounded exactly like the missing fisherman, based on recordings their family had shared during the search. But the voices were coming from deep in a section of swamp no human could easily navigate in the dark. I knew then that the creature could mimic human voices, trying to lure me in. When I fired warning shots into the air to scare it off, something huge came flying through the air at me, an alligator head, thrown with such force it nearly capsized my boat. The creature was showing me it was strong, stronger than anything I'd ever faced. The strangest thing I saw was how it moved through the trees. Once, I watched it walk straight toward a thick stand of cypress trees too close together for even a person to slip between. But somehow, it passed through as if the trees moved aside to let it through, then closed ranks behind it. One morning I found something outside my station door that chilled me to the bone. A careful arrangement of bones and half-eaten animals laid out in a pattern. From my doorway, it just looked like a random pile, but when I climbed up to my roof and looked down, I could see the bones formed a perfect outline of a human body. Like a warning, my radio had stopped working completely by then. Cell phones never got reception this deep in the swamp. I was alone with whatever this thing was, this skunk ape, as the locals called it. I spent that night reviewing everything I knew about the creature. It was intelligent, maybe as smart as a human. It could mimic human voices. It produced a toxin that caused hallucinations and paralysis. It was incredibly strong and fast. It seemed to know the swamp better than even I did, and it was hunting, not just for food, but for sport. As I sat there making notes, the smell returned, so strong I gagged. Outside my window, I saw two red eyes watching me from the darkness, and I knew our game of cat and mouse was about to end, because help was incoming tomorrow. A research team sent by the Park Service to investigate the disappearances, but I had a terrible feeling they were walking into a trap, and I was the bait. The research team arrived early the next morning. 4 scientists, led by Dr. Amelia Porter, a wildlife biologist who specialized in undiscovered species. She had short gray hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. With her were 2 younger researchers and a Park Service guide named Marcus. Ranger Delacroix, Dr. Porter said, shaking my hand firmly. I've read your reports. Most people think you're seeing things, but I've spent 30 years studying reports of unclassified primates. I believe something is out here. I tried to warn them about the creature, about how smart it was, about the toxin it produced, about how it seemed to be playing with us. Marcus and the younger scientists exchanged looks that said they thought I was crazy. But Dr. Porter listened carefully. We'll set up camp here and begin our search, she said. We've brought specialized equipment, infrared cameras, audio recorders that can pick up sounds humans can't hear, and tranquilizer guns just in case. I wanted to tell them that tranquilizer guns wouldn't be enough, but I kept quiet. At least they were taking it somewhat seriously. By mid-afternoon, we had split into teams to cover more ground. I was paired with Dr. Porter, while the others set up monitoring equipment around the areas where I'd spotted the creature. You know, Dr. Porter said, as we checked a series of tracks. I'd found earlier, the indigenous people here have stories about a creature they call the Ancient One. They say it's been in this swamp since before humans arrived, that it can bend space around it. I thought about how the creature seemed to move through solid trees. That might explain some things I've seen. We were deep in the swamp when I noticed the silence falling again. No birds, no insects, nothing. And that smell, like death and chemicals mixed together. Do you smell that? I asked. Dr. Porter nodded, her face going pale. It's close, isn't it? Before I could answer, my radio crackled to life. It was Marcus, his voice high and panicky. Something's happened to Jamie. She's acting strange, saying weird things about joining the Ancient One. Her eyes are all dilated, and she's sweating, but says she feels amazing. We found some kind of oily stuff on her hands. The radio cut off. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. The toxin, I explained. If you touch it, it gets in your system. Makes you see things, act strange. We need to get back to camp now. We hurried back, but when we arrived, everything was chaos. Jamie, one of the young researchers, was laughing hysterically while tearing apart the camp. Marcus was trying to restrain her, but she was fighting with surprising strength. The other researcher, Ben, was sitting against a tree, staring into space with a terrified expression. "It affects everyone differently," I said, watching the scene unfold. "Some get paranoid and scared. Others get almost happy, like they're drugged. Either way, it makes them easy targets." Dr. Porter grabbed her medical kit and began examining Jamie, who had finally been restrained. "They're coming to take us to the Ancient One," Jamie whispered, her eyes unfocused. "We're going to be part of something beautiful." That's when I realized the creature's strategy. It wasn't just using the toxin to paralyze victims, it was using it to turn us against each other, creating chaos, making hunting easier. Night fell and things got worse. Dr. Porter started acting strangely too, mumbling about joining the Ancient One before suddenly lunging at me with a field knife. I managed to dodge, but the blade nicked my arm as Marcus and I tried to secure the increasingly violent researchers. I noticed something important. When I started my airboat engine to move it to higher ground, the creature, which had been circling our camp just beyond the light, retreated. The particular sound of my engine seemed to bother it, and then I remembered another thing it seemed to hate: fire. Earlier, when I had lit a large campfire, the creature had stayed further back in the shadows. I had an idea. My grandmother's grigri pouch contained certain herbs that when mixed with swamp mud created a paste with a special smell. To keep evil spirits away, she'd always said. I'd always thought it was superstition, but maybe there was something to it. I quickly made the paste and applied it to everyone's skin. Within an hour, those who had been affected began to show improvement. Their minds cleared, though they remained weak. "It's blocking the toxin somehow," Dr. Porter said, examining the paste under her portable microscope. "The chemicals in these plants are counteracting the neurotoxin, but our troubles weren't over." During the night, the water level around our camp began to rise, much faster than normal, even for swamp flooding. Trees and vegetation seemed to close in around us, blocking the paths we'd used to get here. "It's trapping us," I realized, "creating a pen to hold us in." That's when Dr. Porter made a horrifying discovery. While examining samples of the oily substance under her microscope, she found traces of human adrenaline and other fear hormones. "This creature isn't just killing for food," she said, her voice shaking. "It's harvesting fear, keeping victims alive and terrified before it consumes them. The toxin isn't just to paralyze, it's to create terror." By morning, we were surrounded by water too deep to walk through, with only one narrow path remaining. "Open, clearly a trap. The airboat is our only chance," I said, "but we all can't fit." We worked frantically to prepare for escape. I rigged together torches made from equipment and fuel. Marcus prepared the airboat. Dr. Porter helped the still weak researchers. As dusk approached, I knew the creature would attack soon. The smell was overwhelming now, and strange sounds surrounded us from all sides, including the voices of the missing fishermen, still calling for help. "When I start the engine, the creature will retreat temporarily," I explained. "That's your window. All of you need to get on the boat and go. Head straight east. Don't stop for anything." "What about you?" Dr. Porter asked. I checked my shotgun. "I'll hold it off. Create a distraction." "That's suicide, Vince," Marcus argued. "Maybe, but I know this swamp better than any of you, and I know this creature now." I handed Dr. Porter my notebooks. "Make sure people know what's out here. Make them believe." When the moment came, I fired up the airboat engine and started. A ring of fire around our camp. As the others boarded the boat, I ran in the opposite direction, firing my shotgun into the air and yelling to draw the creature's attention. I caught glimpses of it as I ran, massive, fur-covered, moving through the trees with impossible speed. I led it away from the others, deeper into the swamp, to places only I knew. The last thing I remember clearly is reaching a hidden island where my grandmother used to take me as a child. The place where she taught me the old ways. I turned to face the creature, shotgun raised as it emerged from the water. its full form finally visible in the moonlight, 8 feet tall, covered in reddish fur, a face that was almost human but wrong in ways I can't describe. And those eyes, ancient, intelligent and hungry. What happened next, I can't fully recall. There was fire, pain, the smell of burnt fur, the creature's roar of rage. The water closing over my head as we both fell into the depths of the swamp. I should have died that night. 1 year later, tourists visiting the Okefenokee report, seeing a strange figure in remote sections of the swamp. A ranger who moves with a slight limp, who never speaks but seems to watch over the waters, who appears and disappears like a ghost. The locals have a new story they tell. They say if you're deep in the swamp and smell something terrible like death and chemicals mixed together, you should run, because it means the swamp ranger is hunting and he's not alone anymore. Dr. Porter's research team made it out alive. They published their findings about an unclassified primate species in the Okefenokee, but most scientists dismissed their work as fantasy. The toxin samples they collected mysteriously disappeared from the lab where they were stored. The missing fishermen were never found. Sometimes on quiet nights when the moon is full, visitors to the swamp observation platforms claim they can see 2 figures moving in the distance. One tall and fur-covered, one human-sized with a slight limp. Not fighting each other, but moving together, hunting together. The Park Service increased patrols after 3 more disappearances last summer. They installed new emergency beacons and prohibited solo trips into remote areas. But the swamp keeps its secrets, and if you visit the Okefenokee and a ranger with a slight limp approaches your boat at dusk, telling you to leave a certain area, don't ask questions, just go, because the swamp belongs to them now. My name is Marina Levine. I've been a park ranger on the Olympic coast in Washington for almost 5 years now. This morning started like many others, with fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead of my boat. The mist rolled in from the Pacific, wrapping around me like a cold, wet blanket. I steered my patrol boat carefully along the rocky shoreline, listening to the steady slap of waves against the hull. The rhythm matched my heartbeat, steady, constant, like the ocean itself, all around me. Huge rocks stuck out of the water like the backbones of giant monsters hiding beneath the waves. 1 minute I could see them, the next they'd vanish as the fog shifted and moved in the weak morning light. Above me, seabirds called to each other, their sad cries bouncing off the tall cliffs nearby. The rock walls were covered in bright green. Moss and small pine trees grew at odd angles, permanently bent from years of strong ocean winds pushing against them. I checked my sonar equipment again, frowning at what I saw. Something wasn't right with the tides lately. For the past month, they'd been acting strangely, rising too high, falling too fast, causing damage to the beaches and confusing the wildlife. Normally, the small pools of water left in the rocks, when the tide goes out, are full of life. Colorful starfish, tiny crabs, sea anemones waving their tentacles. But today, like the past few weeks, they were empty. It was as if all the sea creatures had packed up and left home without telling anyone why. I leaned over the side of my boat and saw something odd, a strange glowing green algae beneath the surface. It was giving off light even though it was daytime. What made it weirder was how it seemed to form patterns, not random blobs, but almost like geometric shapes, too perfect to be made by nature. My radio crackled, making me jump. Through the static, I could hear something. Not the normal chatter of other rangers or fishing boats. This was different, a pulsing rhythm with sounds mixed in that reminded me of whales singing, but at pitches I'd never heard before. Whales can't make sounds like that. I checked my compass and frowned again. The needle was spinning wildly, around and around, completely useless. My GPS was glitching too. All my navigation equipment was failing, even though the weather wasn't that bad. As I guided my boat closer to shore, I noticed strange objects scattered on the beach. I'd been finding these for weeks now, odd metal things with a greenish tint. They had weird writing carved into them, in no language I recognized. Whenever I touched one, it felt unnaturally cold, like holding ice that never melts. I had been sent to check out a small, hidden bay that wasn't visited much. As I approached, something made my whole boat vibrate. Not like an engine problem. This felt like something huge was moving under the water, something alive. I cut the engine and listened, my hand automatically touching the old diving watch. On my wrist, my grandfather's watch, the only thing I had left of him. The silence stretched on, broken only by water lapping against my boat. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from beneath the surface. Something that had been waiting a very long time for someone like me to arrive. I wasn't always a park ranger. Before this, I spent 8 years in the coast. Guard. People tell me I'm good at two things, understanding sea life and finding people who are in trouble on the water. That's why they wanted me here, even though they don't have much money to pay rangers these days. I'm 35 now, and the ocean has shaped me as much as I've studied it. Years of swimming and pulling people from rough waters have made my shoulders broad and my arms strong. I keep my hair cut short, salt and pepper colored now, even though I'm not that old. Long hair is just one more thing that can get caught. When you're trying to save someone in churning water, my right hand moves up to touch the scar that runs from my temple down to my jaw. I don't need to see it anymore. I know exactly where it is. 6 years ago, during a hurricane rescue, our boat flipped. I made it out. 2 of my crew didn't. The doctors said I was lucky, but some kinds of luck feel more like a burden. My fingers find my grandfather's diving watch instead. The glass is scratched, and the metal band has been replaced 3 times, but it still keeps perfect time. He wore it on every dive until his last one, off this same coastline in 1938. They never found his body, just his empty boat drifting. I was born decades later, but somehow wearing his watch makes me feel like he's still guiding me. People think I'm being dramatic when I tell them I can feel the ocean's moods. But I've always known when storms are coming, hours before the weather equipment picks them up. I've navigated through fog and rough waters by what feels like instinct, though I can never explain how I know which way to turn. It's like the sea speaks to me in a language I almost understand. The local tribes trust me more than the other rangers. At first, I thought it was just because I treated them with respect. But over campfires, elders have shared ancient stories about this coastline. They speak in hushed tones about those who walk between land and sea, creatures they say emerge during certain tide patterns. They mark these places on my maps with symbols I've promised not to share with other officials. When you stare at nautical charts and coastal maps as much as I do, changes stand out like a sore thumb. New caves that weren't there before. Landmarks that look slightly different. Most people don't notice, but I do. My colleagues call it my photographic memory, but it's more like the coastline is a face I know by heart. I can spot even the smallest change in its expression back at the ranger station. The other rangers respect what I know, but I see the looks they give each other when I start talking about my theories, about how the deep currents move in patterns too organized to be random, about how something intelligent might be directing them. They humor me, but I know they think I'm obsessed. Maybe I am. My cabin sits on the edge of a cliff overlooking the water. Every wall is covered with my work, tide charts going back 50 years, pins marking where boats have disappeared, and my own drawings showing how sea creatures might have evolved in the deepest trenches where we've never explored. Sometimes I stand back and look at it all, connecting threads between pins, and wonder if I'm seeing patterns that aren't really there. The Coast Guard and the Park Service think my incidents log is a waste of time. They tell me boats disappear because of storms or mechanical failures or human error. They say the changes in the ocean are just climate change. But I keep recording everything anyway. The singing sounds fishermen report hearing through their hulls at night, the unusual migration patterns, the missing time some beach hikers can't account for. I plot it all on my maps and charts, watching as the markers form a pattern around the deepest part of the offshore trench. Something is happening out there in the dark water. Something ancient is waking up. And somehow, I think it's been calling to me my whole life. I stare out at the water. From my boat, the engine quiet now, and realize my hand is touching my grandfather's watch again. The glass face reflects the strange, glowing green light coming from beneath the surface. For just a second, I think I see something move in that reflection, something large and deliberate that isn't a fish or a whale or anything I've been trained to recognize, and in that moment, I feel certain of one thing: whatever is out there knows I'm watching. The first real sign that something was wrong came 3 days later. I got a call about an abandoned fishing boat found on North Beach, a remote stretch of shoreline rarely visited except by the most determined hikers. When I arrived, the morning fog was just burning off. The boat sat perfectly upright on the sand, as if someone had carefully parked it there. It was the Sea Dreamer, a small trawler I recognized. Belonged to the Peterson family, who'd been fishing these waters for generations. "Where's the crew?" I asked the hikers who reported it. They just shrugged. "No one was here when we found it." I climbed aboard carefully. Nothing looked damaged. The engine was fine. There were half-cleaned fish on the deck, work abandoned mid-task. But what made my skin crawl were the barnacles. They covered parts of the deck in perfect spiral patterns, circles within circles. Barnacles don't grow like that naturally. It looked almost deliberate. I collected samples and called in the abandoned vessel. Within days, bodies started washing ashore, 3 of them, all from the Sea Dreamer's crew. I wasn't supposed to see the autopsy reports, but Sheriff Dawson owed me a favor. What I read kept me awake for nights. The medical examiner had found impossible things. Webbing beginning to form between the victims' fingers, strange flaps along their necks that resembled partial gills. Their eyes had changed shape, adapting for underwater vision. The report used long medical terms, but the conclusion was simple and terrifying. These men were changing into something that could live underwater. I found the captain's journal in the boat. The waterproof pages contained increasingly messy handwriting. Night 3, singing through the hull again. Beautiful, but makes it hard to sleep. Mac spent 3 hours staring at the water today. Had to physically pull him back on board when he tried. To swim at 2 a.m. Night 5, everyone's dreaming of the same underwater place. High buildings made of stone, strange lights. We all want to swim now. The last entry simply read, "They're calling us home." At the lab in Seattle, my water samples revealed compounds never recorded before. The scientist who tested them noticed something strange. Lab rats exposed to the water kept trying to submerge their heads in their drinking bowls. All of them showed increased activity in the pineal gland, the part of the brain some people call the third eye. Something in the water was changing their behavior, making them attracted to deep water. That's when I started noticing changes. In myself, too. Each night I dream of vast underwater cities with architecture that seemed ancient yet somehow advanced. Huge stone buildings with strange carvings lit by that same eerie green glow I'd seen in the water. I'd wake up in different places, on my porch, in my yard, once even knee-deep in the surf 1/2 mile from my cabin. Always at exactly 3:27 a.m., always facing the ocean. Local fishermen started bringing me their catches, knowing I studied marine biology. The fish were wrong. A salmon with what looked like human-like fingers forming at the ends of its fins. Crabs with shell patterns that resembled faces. A small octopus that tried to arrange pebbles in mathematical sequences before it died in the holding tank. Something was changing the wildlife. accelerating evolution in ways that should take millions of years, not weeks. That's when I remembered. My grandfather's locked chest in my attic. I'd never opened it. Mom said his writings were disturbing and best left alone. But now, I needed answers. The lock broke easily after all these years. Inside were field journals, dozens of them, filled with my grandfather's precise handwriting and detailed drawings. What I saw made my hands shake. Page after page showed sketches of humanoid creatures that lived underwater, beings with fish-like features but human proportions, webbed hands, large unblinking eyes, gills along elongated necks, the deep ones, he called them in his notes. The most chilling discovery was a map where he'd marked locations along the coast, exact coordinates that matched where I was now finding the strange green artifacts. Where the Sea Dreamer had been abandoned, where the anomalies in the water were strongest, I took my boat out the next day with sonar equipment borrowed from the university. What I found in the deep trench offshore shouldn't have been possible. The sonar revealed massive geometric structures rising from the ocean floor. Buildings, corridors, what looked like a city under the sea. At depths where the pressure should crush any structure made by human hands. Back in my cabin, I spread out a century of tide charts. The pattern jumped out at me immediately. Approximately every 25 years, there were reports of strange occurrences. Along this coastline, unusual tide patterns, missing persons, unidentifiable singing heard offshore at night. The last major event was in 1950. The next peak of whatever cycle was happening would be, I checked my calculations 3 times to be sure, 2 weeks from now, during a rare astronomical alignment, when the moon would be at its closest point to Earth, while perfectly aligned with the sun. I looked up from my charts to the old photograph of my grandfather on my desk. For the first time, I noticed something I'd overlooked. The way his eyes seemed slightly larger than normal, the faint line of scarring along his neck that could have been surgical, or something else. What did you find out there? I whispered to his image. And what did it do to you? As if in answer, I heard a faint melody drift through my open window from the direction of the sea, a haunting series of notes that made my skin tingle and my heart race with a strange mixture of fear and longing. The most terrifying part. I realized I'd been humming the exact same melody in my sleep for weeks. I couldn't sleep, not after everything I'd learned. So on the 3rd night, after finding my grandfather's journals, I took my boat out after midnight. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to navigate by. I killed the engine near the coordinates marked in my grandfather's notes and just waited. The sea was unnaturally calm, like glass. No wind, no waves, just stillness that didn't feel right. I sat in silence for almost an hour, the only sound, my own breathing and the occasional creak of the boat. Then I saw them. At first I thought it was just moonlight playing on the water, silver reflections dancing on the surface. But then the reflections rose up, taking shape as they emerged from the sea. They were human-like, but not human. Tall, slender figures with silvery skin that caught the moonlight and threw it back in rainbow colors. They rose from the water smoothly, not swimming, but almost gliding, as if the border between air and water meant nothing to them. I gripped the edge of my boat so hard my knuckles turned white, but I didn't run. I couldn't. Something about them held me there, frozen, not by fear, but by a strange sense of recognition. Now I could see them clearly, the deep ones, just like in my grandfather's drawings. They had bodies shaped like ours, but with fish-like qualities. Their hands and feet were webbed. They had long necks with slits that opened and closed gently. Gills, I realized. Their eyes were huge and dark, without whites, adapted for seeing in the ocean depths. One of them approached my boat. I should have been terrified, but a deeper part of me felt calm. The creature raised a webbed hand toward me, and then the most extraordinary thing happened. It began to sing. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Multiple tones at once, harmonies impossible for a human voice. The other figures joined in, creating a complex melody that seemed to vibrate through the water, through my boat, through my very bones, and I understood it. Not words exactly, but meanings, impressions. They were greeting me. They knew who I was. They had been waiting. The strangest part. Without thinking, I found myself humming along, then singing back to them in that same impossible way. I don't know how I did it. My vocal cords shouldn't have been able to make those sounds. But in that moment, it felt as natural as breathing, which is when I realized I hadn't taken a breath in nearly 3 minutes. I gasped suddenly, filling my lungs with air. The shock broke whatever spell had held me. I scrambled away from the edge of the boat, nearly tipping it over in my panic. The nearest creature's hand was still extended toward me. I noticed something now that I hadn't seen before. The webbing between its fingers wasn't complete. It was partial, like it was still forming. The creature's skin had a pattern of small, fine scales, but patches of it looked almost human. I looked down at my own hands in the moonlight. My fingers seemed longer somehow, the skin between them slightly thicker at the base. I touched my neck and felt small, tender ridges forming along the sides. My body was changing, just like the fisherman's. "Had, what do you want from me?" I asked aloud, my voice shaking. Their answer came not in words, but in images that flooded my mind. Cities deep beneath the sea, a history that stretched back before humans walked on land, and the knowledge that they weren't invaders from somewhere else. They had been here all along. They showed me how, thousands of years ago, their kind and humans had lived along the same shores, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. How eventually they retreated to the deep ocean as humans spread across the land. A pact had been made, the land for humans, the deep sea for them, the shore as a meeting place when necessary. One of the creatures swam closer, reaching out again. This time, I didn't pull away as webbed fingers touched my face. The touch was cool, but not cold, slightly rough like fine sandpaper. I felt a jolt like electricity pass between us, and suddenly more images filled my mind. They showed me how they had been watching my grandfather, how he had discovered them during his dives, how he had not disappeared but had chosen to go with them. The pieces clicked into place. My lifelong connection to the sea, my ability to predict storms, to find my way in fog. The strange dreams, the humming in my sleep. "You've been calling me my whole life," I whispered. The creature nodded, its large eyes never blinking. More disturbing images followed. I saw how every few generations they needed to connect with surface dwellers. For genetic renewal, I realized with a shock. They were declining, their numbers dwindling without occasional mixing with human bloodlines. That explained the cycles of disappearances every 25 years. The changes in the fishermen's bodies, the way my own body was responding to their presence. "Why me?" I asked. Though I already suspected the answer, the creature's hand moved from my face to my wrist, touching my grandfather's watch. In my mind appeared the image of my grandfather, but changed. His transformation complete, living beneath the waves for decades. Then I saw my mother as a baby and understood the terrible truth. My grandfather had already been partially transformed when he fathered my mother, which meant I wasn't fully human. I never had been. "That's why I can understand you," I said softly. "Why I've always felt the call of the sea." The creature nodded again, and I saw one final set of images. Coastal residents throughout generations, subtly influenced by these beings. Small genetic changes introduced into certain families, including mine, preparations for an eventual return. I realized I had a choice to make, but before I could think clearly, We were interrupted by bright lights sweeping across the water. Another boat approaching fast. The Coast Guard, responding to a report of unusual activity offshore. The deep ones slipped beneath the waves instantly, vanishing as if they'd never been there. But as they disappeared, I heard their song one last time. In my mind, soon the tides will align, the way will open. Choose your true home. As the Coast Guard boat pulled alongside mine, their spotlight illuminated my hands. I quickly shoved them into my pockets, hoping they hadn't seen the webbing beginning to form. Between my fingers, "Everything okay out here, Ranger Levine?" called a familiar voice. It was Ryan Cooper, who'd worked with me in the Coast Guard years ago. "Just checking some unusual tide patterns," I called back, trying to keep my voice normal. Ryan frowned, playing his light across my face. "You don't look so good, Marina. Been sleeping okay?" I nodded quickly. "Just busy with work." As they pulled away, I heard Ryan radio back to shore. "Found Levine. She seems off. Keep an eye on her." I started my engine, hands trembling. I knew what I had to do next. I needed to warn someone about what was happening, about what was coming when the alignment occurred in less than 2 weeks. But as I headed back to shore, a terrible thought occurred to me. Who would I be warning? Them about the deep ones, or the deep ones about them? And which side was I truly on? The next morning, I called my boss in the Coastal Research Center. I sent emails to the Coast Guard and even the governor's office. I told them everything: the underwater structures, the strange changes in marine life, the fishermen's transformations, the creatures I'd seen. I attached sonar readings, water samples, photos of the artifacts, everything I had. Nobody believed me, or at least that's what they said. When the Coast Guard captain called me back, he sounded concerned, not about what I'd found, but about me. "Marina, we got your email, but the coordinates you sent show nothing but normal ocean floor. And those photos, they're just pictures of empty water." I stared at my computer in disbelief, pulling up the files I'd sent. He was right. My sonar images now showed normal seafloor topology. My photos of the green artifacts displayed only ordinary shells and rocks. Even the autopsy reports I'd copied had somehow changed. No mention of webbing or gills, just typical drowning victims. Something or someone had altered my evidence. I drove to the research lab, where I'd sent the water samples, desperate to prove I wasn't losing my mind. "Dr. Lewis," I pleaded, "you tested the samples yourself. You saw the unknown compounds, how they affected the lab rats." He gave me a strange look. The samples were ordinary seawater, Marina. Nothing unusual at all. But as he spoke, I noticed something. A faint line along his neck, poorly hidden by his collar. The beginning of gill formation. It wasn't just my evidence that had been changed. They were already here, already infiltrating, already changing. People Data Science team arrived 2 days later, sent to investigate my claims. I watched them set up equipment on the beach and recognized at least 3 of them by their movements, the subtle way they avoided bright sunlight, how they dipped their hands in water frequently to keep their skin moist. They weren't here to find the truth, they were here to hide it. Meanwhile, my own transformation was accelerating. The webbing between my fingers was obvious now. I wore gloves everywhere. My eyes had become sensitive to light, seeing better in darkness than they ever had before. I found myself taking longer and longer showers, eventually just sitting in the bathtub with the shower running, letting water cascade over my face and neck where the tender ridges were forming. I needed help, but who could I trust? I turned back to my grandfather's journals. In his later entries, he documented his own transformation, but also his attempts to resist it. He'd discovered that the deep ones were vulnerable to certain things. Very high-pitched sonic frequencies disrupted their ability to communicate and coordinate. Certain metal alloys, particularly copper mixed with silver, interfered with the bioelectric fields they used to influence minds and bodies. I began wearing my grandfather's copper bracelet, which he'd noted helped him think clearly near them. I rigged up a sonic device that emitted the frequencies he'd identified. For the first time in weeks, my dreams weren't filled with underwater cities, and the webbing between my fingers stopped spreading. Using my grandfather's detailed maps, I identified what had to be the center of their underwater complex, a massive structure directly above the deepest part of the offshore trench. If I could somehow disrupt that structure during the upcoming alignment, I might be able to stop whatever they were planning. I didn't want to hurt them. Despite everything, I could feel their ancient sorrow, their desperation to survive. But they were changing people against their will. They had to be stopped, or at least forced to negotiate rather than infiltrate. I called in every favor I had at the Coast Guard and borrowed a set of underwater demolition charges, small but powerful. Explosives designed for underwater use. My plan was to place them at key structural points my grandfather had identified, where the disruption would collapse their entryway to the surface world without destroying their deep city. The night before the alignment, I took my boat out one. Last time, the ocean was restless, waves higher than usual as the gravitational forces of the aligned sun and moon pulled at the tides. The moon hung huge and yellow on the horizon, looking close enough to touch. I anchored above the coordinates and prepared my diving gear. As I checked my oxygen tanks, I caught my reflection in a metal surface. My eyes were different now, larger, with a faint silvery shine in the irises. My neck showed distinct ridges despite all my efforts to stop the transformation. Not fully human, I whispered to myself, but still human enough to have a choice. I set the sonic device to protect me during the dive and slipped into the water. The dive should have been impossible. I was going much deeper than any human could safely go. But my partially transformed body handled the pressure. I could stay underwater far longer than my oxygen tanks should have allowed. The underwater structure was even more impressive up close. Vast stone buildings carved with symbols and images telling the story of the deep ones. Now I could see that the green glow came from a type of coral they cultivated, using it for light. Carefully placed the charges at the points marked in my grandfather's journal, junctions where force applied would collapse the tunnels leading to the surface without harming their main habitat. As I worked, I felt their presence watching me. From the shadows, they didn't interfere. Perhaps they understood what I was trying to do was a compromise, not destruction. As I placed the final charge, the deep ones emerged from all sides, dozens of them surrounding me in the water. My sonic device kept them at a distance, but they made no move to attack. Instead, their leader approached, staying just at the edge of the sonic field's range. It looked older than the others, with more human features mixed with the fish-like aspects. With a jolt, I recognized traces of my grandfather's face in its features. Join us completely, its song resonated in my mind. Finish your transformation. Live eternally beneath the waves. It is your birthright, your heritage. You are already one of us. For a moment, I was tempted. I thought of the wonders they could show me, the ancient knowledge they possessed, the freedom of the endless ocean. Part of me yearned for it with an intensity that frightened me. I can't, I said the words, coming out in bubbles, but somehow still carrying my meaning. Not like this, not by force, not by changing people who haven't chosen it. Then what do you offer? The leader asked. A boundary, I replied. Respect the surface world as we'll respect yours. Find willing partners if you need genetic renewal, but no more taking people. No more changing them against their will. The leader considered this, then asked, and what assurance do we have that humans will honor such a pact? None, I admitted, except that I'll be watching. I understand both worlds now. I can be a bridge, a guardian of both realms. The leader approached closer, seemingly unaffected by my sonic device. Now I could see its eyes clearly. They were my grandfather's eyes. You would give up immortality beneath the waves to live a half-life between worlds. I choose both worlds, or neither, I said firmly, my hand hovering over the detonator. Those are my terms. A long moment passed as we regarded each other. Then, slowly, the leader nodded and backed away. The others followed, retreating into the depths of their city. I swam upward, away from the charges. At a safe distance, I pressed the detonator. The explosions were strangely muted underwater, but I could feel the shock waves pass through me. Looking back, I saw the tunnels leading to the surface collapsing, massive clouds of silt and debris billowing upward. The force of the explosions caught me, tumbling me through the water. I lost consciousness as the pressure wave hit. I woke up on a beach at sunrise, the tide lapping at my feet. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing. Then I felt my neck. The ridges were still there, but smaller now. My hands still had slight webbing between the fingers, but it had receded. I was somewhere in between, neither fully human, nor fully one of them. I didn't know if they'd accepted my terms, or if this was just a temporary retreat. But I knew my role now. To watch the boundary between worlds, to make sure both sides kept their distance while allowing necessary contact. 6 months later, a new marine biologist named Dr. Sarah Chen joined the Park Service. During her interview, she asked specific questions about my case. "What happened to Ranger Levine?" she asked my former boss. "I read some of her research papers on coastal phenomena." "Had some kind of breakdown," he replied uncomfortably. "Claimed to see monsters in the water. She's on extended leave." Sarah nodded, but I saw her eyes narrow slightly. She had noticed something. Perhaps the way his collar was arranged to hide the faint ridges on his neck, or how he kept a glass of salt water on his desk that he occasionally dipped his fingers into. The locals still see me sometimes, swimming, offshore at night. Some say I move too fast to be human, covering impossible distances underwater without coming up for air. They're right about that. I leave them messages sometimes. Intricate patterns of shells and stones on the beach that contain warnings about dangerous tides or underwater currents. They've learned to heed these warnings. Not a single boat has been lost since I began my vigil. Dr. Chen found one of my messages last week. Instead of reporting it, she carefully photographed it, then rearranged the shells to form a response. "I know what you are. I want to help. I haven't decided if I'll meet her yet. The boundary between worlds is fragile, and I've learned to be cautious about who I trust. But sometimes I need allies on the surface, people who understand that the sea holds mysteries we should respect, not conquer." The deep ones still sing to me at night, their melodies traveling through water for miles until they reach my underwater cave where the pressure would crush an ordinary human. They keep their distance from the shore now, honoring our agreement. In return, I guide lost ships away from their territory and warn them when humans venture too close. My grandfather's watch still keeps perfect time, even at these depths. Sometimes I think I see him watching me from the shadows of the underwater city, proud of the choice I made. Not to fully join them, but not to destroy them either. To be a bridge between worlds. I am neither fully human nor fully one of them. I am both. I am neither. I am the guardian of the boundary. I am the keeper of the siren's call.